Jerusalem and 44 years old.
Everyone, I'm watching from the NYU Dysautonomia Center in New York, New York.
Hi, we're the Cohens from Charlotte, North Carolina. Marcia, Sammy,
and Jeff. And we're looking forward to FD Day.
Hi, I'm Veronica Segal from São Paulo, Brazil. This picture behind me is a nice bridge that we have here, and people like it, and it's a postcard from the city. I'm enjoying FD Day.
Hi everyone!
We're the Adler family.
We're from Australia.
Hope you have a good FD day.
Bye.
See you soon!
Hi,
we're the
Newmans.
Lisa.
Rebecca.
Jeff.
Today we're in beautiful Fire Island, New York, but on FD Day we'll be watching from Rybrook, New York.
We're looking forward to FD Day.
And seeing all our friends virtually.
Hey everyone, this is Alexia. I'm here with my family on Mother's Day. Here's my goddaughter, Nia, and I'm her godmother, so I'm her mother too. And I wanted to say have a nice day and see everyone on FD Day on June 6th. See you there. Bye.
Hi everyone, I'm watching here from the Dysautonomia Center in New York, New York.
Hi, we're joining from the University of Georgia
In Athens, Georgia.
I'm watching with J Screen. Thank you so much to the FD Foundation for all of your support over the years to help us continue our education and access to genetic testing. Have a great day.
Hi, we're the Azanowski family. Florence,
Nelson,
And Morgan.
we're watching from Montreal, Quebec, Canada.
Hi, everyone. It's my great pleasure to extend a very warm welcome to all of you on behalf of the Familial Dysautonomia Foundation for our 36th annual FD Day. I hope that you and yours have weathered this very difficult pandemic year without too much damage. For those who don't know me, my name is Faye Ginsberg. In addition to my day job as an anthropology professor at New York University, it's an honor to be serving my 9th year as president of the foundation, and especially to be mother of Samantha Myers, who has mentored me in the ups and downs of living with FD for over 3 decades. Samantha deals with the substantial complexities of this condition with astonishing goodwill, wit, and generosity of spirit. I know that this kind of attitude is shared by so many in our community, inspiring the foundation staff and our board to continue in our efforts raising awareness and money to support the Dysautonomia Center's exceptional medical team. Thanks to their efforts, along with those of supportive families, we now have the greatest number of people living to adulthood with this condition since it was first identified in 1949. Last year, when we pivoted to virtual FD Day, we assumed it was a one-time adaptation to the COVID-imposed restrictions of that moment. But it was one of the rare silver linings of the pandemic. Typically, about 150 people attend FD Day in person at NYU Langone. Last year's virtual event brought together 400 people from 250 households hailing from 25 states and 9 countries. Pretty good for a rare disease. It turned out to be a very lively community-building occasion with members of the FD community from around the globe who had an opportunity to learn from our medical and scientific teams and to meet each other. So it looks like the virtual is the new normal. 2021 is the foundation's 70th anniversary since it was founded by a handful of FD families in 1951. We are one of the most long-standing groups supporting treatment and research for a genetic disorder. The foundation has achieved a number of significant milestones in our 7 decades. In 1970, the Dysautonomia Center was launched at NYU Langone Medical Center with our support. Through greatly improved medical care under the guidance first of Dr. Axelrod and now under Dr. Kaufman, FD was transformed from a fatal childhood illness to a chronic condition that people can live with for decades. We have also been instrumental in supporting the treatment of FD in Israel, and over the years, we have invested millions of dollars in research with significant results, including, in 2001, the identification of the genetic mutation that causes FD. Since then, the availability of genetic testing with groups like JScreen has resulted in countless births of healthy babies worldwide. This genetic knowledge has also been foundational to some of the cutting-edge emerging treatments that you will be hearing about today. Before turning things over to our next speaker, some thanks are in order. We are so fortunate to have the talented leadership of Dr. Horacio Kaufman, current director of the NYU Dysautonomia Center, and the team he directs, including nurse practitioners Kaya Delamo and Zenith Khan, Dr. Alejandra Gonzalez Duarte, who has recently joined the center remotely from Mexico City and soon to be here in person, bringing her longstanding knowledge of FD as both a clinician and a researcher, and clinical fellow Dr. Patricio Millar, who came on board last August. We are grateful to them and the rest of the team at the treatment center, as well as the ongoing contributions of our scientific advisory board, in particular, the dynamic leadership of Dr. Adrian Gilbert, FD parent and scientist from Israel, and Dr. Francis Lefcourt, distinguished professor of neuroscience at Montana State University. Though we are an ultra-rare disease, we are blessed to have attracted such brilliant people to our cause. Let me also express my appreciation to our foundation's resourceful board of directors who do so much and who really stepped up in this very challenging year to ensure that the foundation could maintain a consistent level of support for the Dysautonomia Center. I thank them and the many contributors to our events, our social media campaigns, and our annual journal, raising not only money, but spirits and awareness as well. Finally, I am so appreciative of our capable and devoted executive director, Lady Etkin. I want to express my gratitude to her and the excellent foundation team, Natasha Weinstein and Erin Breen, and our various volunteers for their work throughout the year and on today's event. Once again, it's a pleasure to welcome you today. And now let me turn things over to the Foundation's Executive Director, Lady Etkin.
Thank you, Faye. I'm so happy to be here today for the Foundation's 36th Annual FD Day. And I'm also pleased to welcome everyone to our second year holding a virtual global event. I am delighted to welcome so many members of our community worldwide, including more than 150 households registered, close to 300 people attending, representing 21 US states and 9 countries on 5 continents. While we love that the miracle of technology enables us all to gather virtually from across the globe, the piece we are missing today is the social interaction. The closest substitute we have to schmoozing in person is the chat box, so we encourage you to use it liberally. Tell us where you're listening from. Say hi to your friends who are also watching today. Let's keep an active dialogue going throughout the day. And while you're chatting, don't forget to also post on social media using the hashtag FDDay2021, and remember to tag the foundation. Let everyone know we're here. I'd like to take a moment to share some news and updates from the foundation. I can assure you that we have not let the pandemic keep us down. In fact, it has inspired us in many ways. For example, the foundation funded virtual checkup kits that facilitated telemedicine checkups at the Dysautonomia Center, a program that has been very well received by families and is certain to continue beyond the pandemic. I'm sure we will hear more about this initiative from the medical team later in the program. Also, for more than a year now, the foundation, and more specifically, my colleague Natasha Weinstein, has been facilitating virtual hangouts for people with FD, offering a place and time to socialize, play games, and make friends. If you participate in a hangout and enjoy it, give us a shout out in the chat box now. If you're not currently participating but would like to, please contact the foundation office. We will get you set up. Natasha is also planning the next virtual FD movie night for June 23rd. Our Next Gen group, led by siblings, cousins, and friends of people with FD, held its first virtual event, a mixology class, earlier this month. It was a lot of fun and a great success. If you attended, give us a shout out in the chat box. And lastly, we think it's very important to incorporate the voice of people with FD in the work of the foundation, as we want to be sure that we are focused on the problems and solutions that are most important to people living with FD. We're not sure what this is ultimately going to look like, but to start the conversation, we are holding a virtual town meeting on Sunday, July 11th. To learn more about any of these initiatives, please contact the foundation. Today, you will hear about all the important work underway to help people with FD live better and longer lives. None of this would be possible without philanthropic support. If you currently support the FD Foundation or your local FD organization, we thank you. If you do not, we hope you will consider doing so. For the first time this year, we invited sponsorship support of FD Day. It is my pleasure to acknowledge and thank our FD Day sponsors, our supporters, Faye Ginsberg and Fred Myers, Dina and Daniel Landau, Jennifer and David Sonnenschein, Tova and Howard Weiser, and our friends, J-Screen and Town Total Compounding Center. To make your donation today, use the clickable link in the chat box or in the YouTube description below. You can also visit the Foundation website anytime. I'd also like to share some information with you about today's program. To view a schedule for the day, be sure to visit the FD Day landing page on the Foundation website, which you can reach by clicking the same link posted in the chat box. The research booklet, prepared by the Dysautonomia Center, will be available for viewing on the FD Day page later today. If at any point during the program you experience technical difficulties, please contact the Foundation by email or phone. Today's program will feature 2 live Q&A sessions, one during the clinical program and another during the research program. If you have questions for either of our expert panels, you will have the opportunity to post them in the chat box. Following the FD Day program, the Foundation, together with the Dysautonomia Center Treatment Center team, is hosting a karaoke after party for people with FD, starting at 2:15 p.m. Eastern Time. If you're not registered but would still like to attend, check out the chat box now for a link to sign up. And now, because we are truly an international community, we are delighted to include greetings from our 3 international chapters in the UK, Israel, and Montreal, Canada.
As a founding member and trustee, I have been involved with FD UK for almost 40 years, and it's a great pleasure to let the international FD community know of our work in the UK. As one of the charity's trustees, it's unfortunate to tell you that we have had our tragedies over the years, but these are now less frequent, and the FD members in our UK community are now reaching beyond their teenage years into their 30s and 40s. This is not just due to the care that they get in the UK and our charity support, but also because of the international efforts in research, medicine, and collaboration, support and experience from and within the international community and NYFD, which I'm delighted to say that our charity is a part of. Let me hand over to Ros, who is a past chair of FD UK and parent of an FD sufferer. She plays a major role in the day-to-day running of FD UK and is a parent liaison officer with some of our major London hospitals. She will give you an insight into our work. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. 2020 and 21 have been very difficult years for everyone around the world, not at least people with challenging, complex and rare diseases. But this has not been stopping our charity from continuing to provide support to families touched by FD. This year, we have provided supplements, therapies and respite to our members and have been able to continue our fundraising efforts via Zoom. Just last month, we had over 200 participants come to join our online quiz, which raised much needed funds and continue to raise awareness in this devastating illness in our community. We are delighted to be partnership with the Familial Dysautonomia Foundation in the US and look forward to long and mutual beneficial partnerships. Thank you.
Hi,
I'm Zvi Adler from the Israeli Familial Dysautonomia Organization. Like everyone else, we also had a very challenging year, and unfortunately, we lost one of our members who died as a result of the COVID-19. In addition to the problems common to all, here in Israel, we also have to deal with an unstable political situation of 4 consecutive election campaigns, without permanent government and with no government budget. As a result, this year we were also deprived of the little support we received from the Ministry of Welfare, so this year we had to finance all our activities from the few surpluses we had from previous years, with no additional income. The main project we continued with was the support groups for adults with dysautonomia, which are divided into sectors: secular and religious, ultra-Orthodox boys and ultra-Orthodox girls. We had to activate the groups in Zoom, and we were happy to discover that there were benefits, as friends who had difficulty reaching the frontal meetings also participated in the online meetings, and so we were able to help more members, which proved very essential due to the increase in the need of support. Thank God, and thanks to the vaccines, frontal sessions became possible in recent months, but in view of the success of the online sessions, we continue to combine the 2 types of sessions to enjoy the benefits of both. I hope we will also start returning to the treatments and ongoing follow-ups at our 2 medical centers after during the COVID-19 period I did not succeed to make it possible to copy the remote treatment model you developed in New York and apply it here in Israel. I hope that following this FD Day, the cooperation will be strengthened and we will be able to receive the information that will enable the application of the home visit kits for annual virtual checkups and enjoy its benefits here in Israel as well. I wish all of you that you too will soon emerge from the epidemic as is beginning to happen here with us, and that we can all return to routine and focus on improving the condition and quality of life for people with dysautonomia and their families. All the best and health to all.
Hello, greetings from Montreal. I am Florence Freed, and I am the president of the Montreal chapter of Dysautonomia. My husband, Nelson Azanowski, and I have a wonderful son, Morgan, who has familial dysautonomia. He is now 25 years old. I can't believe the time has gone so quickly. We are a small chapter that has changed over time. I became president in 2004, and I continue to consult with the founding president, Norma Bigman, who began this chapter in 1974. With great demands on individuals' time, I decided that the core fundraising would be an annual campaign which has continued for 17 years. I am appreciative and proud of the generosity of donors over these years. The Montreal chapter has contributed continuously to the NYU Langone Medical Center. Most recently, funds were sent so that the NYU Dysautonomia Center was able to purchase a much-needed continuous blood pressure monitoring system. Fundraising efforts increased with the campaign that the late Stephen Schwartzberg ran in 2014. The Schwartzberg family from Edmonton, Alberta, continued to actively fundraise, and with the generous donations received, the Stevie Schwartzberg Mental Health Program has been successfully funded for the 2nd year. We are pleased that we can provide Canadian donors with a charity to make donations to, in order to continue with the important necessary research and treatment into familial dysautonomia. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you, Brian, Roz, Devere, and Florence. We are so delighted to hear from our fellow FD organizations in the UK, Israel, and Montreal today. And now, it is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Horatio Kaufman, Director of the Dysautonomia Treatment Center at NYU Langone.
Good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are. Welcome to FD Day 2021, the 36th annual FD Day. As many of you know, since 1985, every year, the first Sunday of June is FD Day, a day when patients and their families from all over the world get together with clinicians and researchers. We greet old friends and meet new ones, and everybody can hear the latest news on FD. This year, like last year, due to the COVID pandemic, we meet virtually. Now, these virtual meetings lack the warmness of the physical presence, but on the good side, they allow many more people to participate all over the world. So today we have a very busy program, and I hope you will enjoy it. You will hear about the COVID pandemic and its impact on our community that fortunately has been mild, also about the development of telemedicine, and you will also hear in detail about drugs that we hope will correct the genetic defects of FD and be able to treat and slow the progression of the disease. As we do every FD Day, I will first tell you about the new patients. Now, these new patients are very, very special, the new patients we have this year, and in fact, they provide a theme to our FD Day 2021. It's a very special milestone. And the theme is the expansion of the FD family. Now, I will try to tell you these details without using slides. You will have all this in the research booklet. So I'm going to try to explain this without figures. I told you, you may remember that I told you last year about a number of patients from Mexico who had familial dysautonomia. Now, they were unaware of their Jewish heritage, but with genetic analysis, we found that they had the same genetic mutation that most other FD patients had. They had 2 copies of what we call the founder mutation. That is a mutation that can be traced back to a Jewish person living in Poland in the 16th century. Now, this year, we have 2 very special newcomers. What makes them so special is that they have new mutations. They have mutations that had never been described before, but they are combined with the founder mutation. So we have 2 new members of the community that have FD. One is an African-American girl from New Jersey, and the other is a boy from Poland. Both were born in 2017, but were diagnosed only recently at age 4. Now, for both children, the diagnosis came as a result of whole exome analysis that was performed because they were chronically sick and doctors couldn't figure out what disease they had. The difficulty in the diagnosis was, we suspect, at least in part, because these children had no known Jewish ancestry, and therefore their doctors were not thinking in the possibility of FD, which is, as you know, classified as a Jewish genetic disease. But both new patients turn out to be heterozygous for the ELP1 gene, the gene responsible for FD. Now, heterozygous, from the word hetero, different, means that they have inherited different forms of the gene, different mutations from each parent. Now, this is what's called a heterozygous or different genotype, and it stands in contrast to a homozygous phenotype, homo meaning same, where an individual inherits identical forms of the gene from each parent. Now, both these new patients, the girl from New Jersey, the African American girl, and the boy from Poland, they inherited only one copy of what is called the founder FD mutation, the one that over 99.5% of people with FD have two copies of. Now, they had that copy from one parent, and the other copy, you need two copies to express the disease, the other copy is a new mutation, is a newly discovered mutation in this ELP1 gene. So, let me explain. You see, as I mentioned, almost all people with FD, 99.5% of the people we know, are homozygous, meaning they are descendants from one person, the founder, who has been traced to a Jewish person living in Poland in the 1500s. That is, both the mother and the father are descendants of the founder, and each provides one identical copy of the mutated gene to the children. In other words, the person with FD has inherited one identical mutation from each parent. Now, both these new patients, that is not the case in these new patients. In both of them, one of the parents is a descendant of the founder, but the other parent is not. In the case of the African American girl, what's fascinating is that the father is from Trinidad. Trinidad is an island in the Caribbean, and he carries, despite being from Trinidad, a copy of the founder mutation. Now, although he's not aware or was not aware of Jewish ancestry, he is a direct descendant of that Jewish founder. Now, we know there were like 15,000 Jews that went to the Caribbean islands at the turn of the century from the Pale, at the time that over 2 million came to the States or to the US and a few 100,000 to South America. 15,000 went to Trinidad. And then a few thousand more went to Trinidad immediately before and during World War II. So the father is a descendant of one of those persons that carried the founder mutation from the Pale. Now, the mother is African American from New Jersey and is not a descendant of the founder, but she carries one copy of a different mutation in the same gene, the ELP1 gene. Now, the mutation that the mother has never before been reported to produce disease. Now, when combined with one of the founder mutations, or the founder mutation, the combination impairs the production of the protein and causes familial dysautonomia. Now, how do we know this? How can we be so certain of this? Well, we asked Sue Slagerhaupt and Elisabetta Morini and Gadi in their big genetic center in Boston at MGH, and they not only look at the results, but they consult these databases, and also they can tell us that according to the location of the mutation, they predict that there will be big trouble in the synthesis of the elongator protein 1, and therefore this will result in FD. Now, they also tell us, based on another database called Genome, that two other people in this large database with the same mutation, and these two people are from Africa. So, and clearly the mother of this girl, although she's in New Jersey, she's African American and also comes from Africa. So our new FD patient has one copy of the founder mutation, the one that comes from the 16th century in Poland, in what's today Poland, and one mutation that appears to originate in Africa. So quite a first for our community, and we are of course very curious and excited to help this little girl. The second newcomer is a boy from Poland. Now, this boy has no known Jewish ancestry, and it turns out to be a very similar story because he's also heterozygous for the FD gene. This boy inherited one copy of the founder mutation from his father and a new mutation that had not been described before from his mother. Now, this mutation that had never before been described to produce disease appears, when one looks at this big database of alleles, appears in two European persons that we know were non-Finnish and were non-Jewish. But clearly that mutation combined with the founder mutation results in impairment, severe impairment of the synthesis of the protein, and the affected person develops the disease. Now, this brings the total number of mutations in familial dysautonomia to 5. And of those 5 mutations, 3 are with certainty not of Jewish origin, 3 of them. So, and 2 of those 3 we discovered within the last year. Now, why do these discoveries matter? Well, there are a number of reasons. The first is they show that the current criteria that requires Jewish ancestry for the diagnosis of familial dysautonomia should be modified. For 2 reasons. First, because many people are unaware of the Jewish ancestry, not only the Mexican patients, but patients in other places are unaware of Jewish ancestry in their families, but also now because we know of at least 3 mutations that do not originate in Jewish people. So required Jewish ancestry can delay diagnosis because patients or physicians do not even consider the possibility of familial dysautonomia in patients that have suggestive symptoms, but they don't tell the physician about their Jewish ancestry because they don't know it or because they don't have it. So the discovery of these new mutations also suggests that there will be a larger number of patients and the population will be more diverse. The FD population will be more diverse in the future. Of course, we believe that this should increase the interest not only of researchers but also of pharma to focus on familial dysautonomia. So thank you very much for listening to this. I hope I could tell you the story. And again, my goal was not to use slides. I hope I was able to make it understandable. So I want to switch gears now. Remember last year I mentioned a doctor in Mexico that had worked with us 10 years, more than a decade ago at the Dysautonomia Center at NYU. And then she did a number of things in Mexico and created also a center that was taking care of patients in Mexico. We are extremely lucky that Dr. Alejandra González Duarte is joining the Dysautonomia Center, and I want to we'll pass the microphone to her in a minute. Before, I think is Zenith, that the fantastic nurse practitioner of our center that many of you already know. I think she will be our MC together with Kaya. And you will also, as I mentioned before, hear about the latest in genetic treatments from basic researchers that are developing them in the lab. Thank you very much, and Zenith, the microphone is yours. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kaufman, for your wisdom and guidance. Hello, everyone. My name is Zenith, and I'm one of the nurse practitioners at the NYU Dysautonomia Center here with Dr. Dalamo. Dr. Kaufman, thank you for sharing how newly diagnosed cases in FD in non-traditional populations provide great insight into the disease and the future of FD. Upcoming clinical trials will be an opportunity for families to continue their active participation in the work that the center is doing now. Now I'll move into introducing our new clinician joining the center team, Dr. Alejandra Gonzalez Duarte.
Good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are. Welcome to...
Hi, I'm Alejandra Gonzalez Duarte. I am a neurologist and an internist. I have a fellowship in autonomic disorders that I completed in 2008 under the supervision of Dr. Horacio Kaufman. I also have another fellowship in neuroinfectious diseases, and I recently had my PhD in bioethics. I am very glad to go back to the center and work with a group of doctors and nurses and take care of the patients with FD. For the last 10 years, I have been following up all the scientific advances and also the social media of the FD community. Particularly, I have enjoyed, laughed, and cried a little bit with the photography contest. I am very honored to be back, and I wish we can meet soon. Have a nice day in this FD meeting. Take care.
Thank you, Dr. Gonzalez Duarte. We are so happy to have such an experienced physician who's so highly community already returning to us. Our next presenter is Dr. Patricio Millar-Vernetti, who will be talking to us about COVID-19 and how it affected FD patients.
Hi, I'm Dr. Patricio Millar. I'm a neurologist at the Dysautonomia Center, and I'm glad to take part of FD Day in its second virtual version. Today, I'm going to talk about something that we've all been living with and experiencing for the past year, COVID-19 and vaccines. So, since the pandemic started, millions of people around the world have been affected by COVID-19, including many of us. And by now, it's very likely that we've all either been affected directly by it, or have had a family member or a friend that has been affected by COVID too. During the early days of the pandemic, something that we were concerned or worried about was how would people with FD do if they were to have COVID-19. We know that pulmonary and respiratory problems are a common concern in FD, and knowing that COVID is a disease that primarily affects the lungs and the respiratory system, this was a big concern for us too, as well as if this would trigger severe or unrelated crises too. Fortunately, so far we only have a record of 14 cases of COVID-19 among FD patients, including a patient that even had COVID twice. We've heard about cases across 4 different countries in patients with ages ranging as young as 13 years of age all the way to 50 years of age. And to put this into perspective, this is about 5% of the FD community, which when compared to the whole population is about as half as the proportion of people who has had COVID in the US. And this is a relatively low number, which is a reflection of the great job our community has been doing in keeping safe with recommended measures to prevent infection, such as wearing face masks, keeping social distancing, and hand washing. And we want to congratulate you for that, because that's an accomplishment that you've achieved by yourselves. Only 3 patients needed to be hospitalized for COVID-related complications, one of which had serious pulmonary problems to begin with. Another one had pneumonia and metabolic problems that required IV fluids and antibiotics. And there was sadly one patient in Israel who passed away due to direct viral heart complications. But for the most cases, symptoms were mild and could be managed either at home or as outpatients. Many of these people were diagnosed due to a high suspicion for COVID or just as a precaution in the context of having close contacts who had also tested positive. These symptoms ranged from mild fever, cough, feeling tired and lethargic, and some patients had autonomic crises that again could be managed with their usual treatment and medications. Most importantly, we haven't had any reports of people with FD having long hauler syndromes or long-term post-COVID complications. Moving on to vaccines, we know that COVID vaccines are effective. They help reduce the severity of the symptoms, they help avoid hospitalizations, and they help reduce mortality from COVID. Furthermore, it has been more recently shown that they help reduce the transmission of the virus itself as well. So far, we've had over 40 patients with FD receiving different vaccines, including the vaccines from Pfizer, Moderna, AstraZeneca, and Johnson & Johnson, and even some couple of patients younger than 18 years of age. Anticipating flu-like symptoms from the vaccine is a very normal and commonly occurs from any vaccine. These symptoms, which sometimes include fever, malaise, chills, body aches, or local site pain at the injection sites, are all signs that our own body is mounting a good immune response and responding to the vaccine and the antibodies it's creating. Which is why it may be more common to have these symptoms for people who have already had COVID or who are getting your second dose. We know that this can create some anxiety around getting the vaccine, but that doesn't mean that everybody will get these symptoms. We've even heard about patients who have had COVID and didn't have any side effects from the vaccine. Nevertheless, we understand that this can be very uncomfortable too, and that in patients with FD, this may even lead to an autonomic crisis. For everyone who has had the vaccine, most people with FD tolerated very well without any symptoms at all, which is also true in the average population. Sometimes when having the second vaccine, as mentioned before, can elicit more of these symptoms because the immune system is already primed to take action from the first dose. For this reason, and to avoid these symptoms that again could terminate or ultimately lead to an autonomic crisis, we're currently recommending to, in the evening after the second dose, start taking ibuprofen or acetaminophen, also known as paracetamol, and to keep taking it around the clock for the following 2 to 3 days. Some people prefer to take the medications only if they start feeling unwell or if they take their temperature and find out that they have a fever coming up. But if following this scheduled dosing, it's especially important not to skip any doses at nighttime or during sleep, as many people may wake up during the night with fever or other flu-like symptoms like chills that can quickly mount up to trigger an autonomic crisis. Nevertheless, so far, following these recommendations of taking these medications every 6 or 8 hours as indicated has had a good results, resulting in fewer side effects, better tolerability to the vaccine, and no autonomic crisis. So to sum up, we're happy to see that a few patients with FD who have had COVID have had mild symptoms and fewer complications, and we want to keep it that way. We still encourage people to maintain social distance when possible, to wear face masks in public, and most importantly to get vaccinated, so we can slowly and safely go back to normal.
Thank you so much, Dr. Miller. Hi, I'm Dr. Akaya Dalamo. I'm also a nurse practitioner here at the NYU Dysautonomia Center. The pandemic has made such an impact on all of our lives over the last year. Of the many changes that we've experienced, one that is here to stay is telemedicine. Nurse practitioner Zenith Khan will speak about using telemedicine for patients with FD.
Hello everyone! Today we will be talking about telemedicine and virtual visits at the NYU Dysautonomia Center for patients with familial dysautonomia. The NYU Dysautonomia Center has been serving patients with FD since 1970, and it remains one of the preeminent international facilities for treatment of this devastating and progressive disease. Our center devotes itself to the care of patients with this complex disorder to provide each patient with a comprehensive and individual plan of care. Our center sees patients from all over the country and the world for their annual and interim visits. FD patients have regular in-person visits with the specialized care team, including a family nurse practitioner, a neurologist, pulmonologist, gastroenterologist, and ophthalmologist. And as you can see here, patients fly in from all over the country and the world to receive care at our center. Regular annual in-person visits are encouraged for every patient to receive the latest up-to-date level of care. While beneficial for overall health outcomes, this care model can be financially burdensome and time-consuming, and can create a barrier for patients who need to travel significant distances to reach a specialized FD center. Prior to the pandemic, out-of-state and even some in-state patients complained that visits into Manhattan were financially burdensome, time-consuming, and put patients at risk of complications due to the special considerations and accommodations needed for travel. Frequent in-person appointments can also increase the risk of infection and even greater concern in light of the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic. When the COVID-19 sheltering-in-place order came into New York City, we had to reimagine what a visit to the Dysautonomia Center looked like. We wanted to remain accessible and give our patients the best quality of care possible from the safety of their homes. So the Dysautonomia Center had to ask ourselves, how would this look like for medically complex patients? Telehealth offered care options for patients with FD that overcame many inconveniences and safety concerns surrounding in-person appointments. However, the level of monitoring required for a routine FD patient visit went beyond what a normal telehealth visit could provide. As the pandemic had forced many clinics to transition to telehealth models, the FD Center developed a special task force to advocate for patients to continue to receive comprehensive care. In response to the COVID-19 safety measures, the Dysautonomia Center, with the help of the FD Foundation, implemented a telehealth model that involved web-based video appointments with multiple members of a multidisciplinary team and kits with written instructions and videos demonstrations sent to patients prior to the appointments. These kits are used to measure weight and height, evaluate lung health, listen to heart sounds, record EKGs, assess gaits, and look for ulcers under the supervision of a healthcare provider. Here's a video that talks about all the details of our kit.
Welcome to the FD Kit. In here, you will find everything necessary in order to complete your visit.
Hello, welcome to your telemedicine visit with the Dysautonomia Center. Using telemedicine is new to many people, and like anything new, it can cause some initial anxiety. We understand this, and so have prepared a video to help you through this journey. Please take care of all of the items inside the kit and return them in the same condition that you found them in, because these are tools that are vital for the continued assessment of others, and your actions in caring for them are caring and respectful actions towards people who need to use them after you.
Each kit included a real-time electronic stethoscope, which allowed patients to transmit heart and lung sounds to our licensed care providers, a cardiac EKG monitor to capture medical-grade EKGs in 30 seconds to detect for atrial fibrillation, bradycardia, tachycardia, or normal sinus rhythm, an on-run blood pressure machine to monitor orthostatic blood pressures and symptoms from the comfort of their homes with an ambulatory, clinically validated machine, a 24-hour blood pressure monitor to assess blood pressure variability throughout the day, a pulse oximeter to monitor heart rate and blood oxygenation status, an Apple iPad which conveniently was able to send all files to providers in real time, and return shipping labels to decrease turnaround time and to gather all the data in a timely fashion. Many patients expressed great feedback regarding the virtual visits. Here are some examples of the great feedback we received regarding the kits. Patients and family members expressed how the virtual visits remained comprehensive, thorough, convenient, and extremely helpful during such uncertain times. While the world was on pause, patients with FD continued to need high levels of care and attention to ensure their health did not deteriorate or regress. Among the benefits of telehealth we identified were the lack of travel time to the clinic, lesser time away from work, and reduced risk of infection. Some limitations of the telehealth visits included lack of access to Wi-Fi and limited physical examination. Over the past year, patients and families have expressed an overwhelming support for telehealth. This encourages patients and providers at our center to incorporate telehealth clinics into FD care beyond the COVID-19 pandemic. Future work will need to be done to assess the effects of telehealth visits on FD health outcomes. As always, in-person visits are opened and encouraged for patients and their families to continue care for patients with FD. This model is just one example of many of how the Dysautonomia Center puts patient safety at the forefront of patient care. We will continue to adapt with the times and ensure that every patient, regardless of their geographic status, is cared for and receives the latest information to live the best possible lives they can. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you so much, Zenith. Collaborating with clinicians around the world has always been an important part of our work. We will now hear from the clinicians at 2 FD centers in Israel who have been key in sharing their clinical experiences of COVID-19 illness and vaccines in their patients. First, we have Dr. Alex Gileles Hillel from Hadassah University Medical Center. Then we will hear from Dr. Bat Elbar Aluma from Sheba Medical Center.
Good morning and good evening, everybody. And thank you for joining us for this FD Day. My name is Alex Gileles Hillel, and I'm the head of the FD Clinic at Hadassah Medical Center. I think the best experience I can share from this year is how we could feel so distant from other people during this pandemic, but also kept close contact with the families of FD patients through some more online communications. And my hope is, as Veer Adler mentioned earlier, the person in charge of our family's foundation center, that with the upcoming, how should I say, the recovery from this crisis, we will start seeing more and more patients visiting the center because although telemedicine has many, many benefits, including the opportunity to follow distant patients, I think Israel offers an opportunity to see the patients in person and try to optimize the care individually and with each patient by itself. In any case, I will hope we can hear more about the pulmonary challenges that this disease has brought to us, and especially as the patients have underlying pulmonary disease. I think we could learn something from the care that was provided to COVID patients and also translated to FD. Thank you, everybody, and hope to hear more interesting stuff today. And now I will transfer the microphone to Dr. Batel Aluma from Tel Shomer Center.
Hi. Hi, everyone. My name is Dr. Bar Aluma. Probably part of you remember me from last year. Before I start, I have a few slides for you. I want to thank, first of all the participants, but especially Monique. Monique had volunteered to help us with natural history, to put all the data from here in Israel and to give it to the NYU Center. We struggled with that for a period because of the COVID-19, but now that we are in the post-vaccine era, so I'm very happy that Monique, that is also hearing us, can help us with that. And if we're talking about natural history, I'm going to show you a little bit of data of the pulmonary function tests of participants, of patients with dysautonomia here in Israel. So next slide. So here we have data from 52 participants and 199 tests, almost 200. Each participant had 3 to 4 pulmonary function tests over the years, with a follow-up that goes from 1 year to 7.5 years. Next slide. So here we see a lot of numbers, but mostly what we can see from that is we have several pulmonary function tests that are the most important, the FEV1, the FVC, and also small airways. Next slide. Also next slide. So what we see from here is that when we divided all pulmonary functions into two groups, we looked at them, at everyone at the age of 30, and we divided them into 2 groups. The one is the L group, which has low pulmonary function tests, And the other one is the M. I don't know why we chose the M. Maybe M is like mitztayen in Hebrew, which means exceptional, excellent. And what we can see here, that the line is exponential. What it means that the pulmonary function test drops significantly up to the age of 20. That is with the L group, with the one with the blue, and the M group stays rather. It goes down only at the age of 30 or 40, so they're quite stable. Next slide. Next slide. Sorry, the one before. Thank you. The same thing we see also with the trapped air. Some of the participants were also able to do not only spirometry, which depends on how you do the test, how you blow out the air, but also volume of the lungs that you do when you enter a box, and with the difference of pressure within the box and in the lungs, we can also see how much air is trapped in, and we can take it out. And also here we see the same thing. We see that the L group is kind of high and gets higher with time, and the M group is quite stable. Next one. And here another thing that we see is the response to bronchodilators. So what we see here, that we sometimes when pulmonary function test gets worse with years, we don't have a good response to bronchodilators, albuterol or Atrovent, because of sometimes we have bronchomalacia, which means that the cartilage get a little bit weak. But here we see that even with low pulmonary function test, there was a positive response. So there are two things that we can learn from this data. First of all, if we take good care of our lungs, then we can stay healthy for a long period. And second is that we are responsive to bronchodilators, but it's a good thing to check it once in a while, and to see that we are still responsive and we're not just getting the treatment without any good response. So that is the data that I have to show you about pulmonary function tests over the years. And thank you very much for hearing me.
Thank you so much, Dr. Galelas Hillel and Dr. Barr, for your continued collaboration and care for patients with FD. Now we will move into the question and answer session moderated by Kaya and I. We invite you to submit questions via the chat box. We also have some questions that were submitted when you registered for FD Day, and we'll get started by answering some of those.
Our panelists today are Dr. Kaufman, Dr. Miller, Dr. Gonzalez Duarte, from our team here at the NYU Dysautonomia Center, and from the Israel chapters, Dr. Galelas Hillel and Dr. Barr.
Our first question is one that are on many families' minds through this difficult year. The first question goes to Dr. Patricio Millar. Dr. Millar, as schools and communities are reopening, what steps should families reintegrate back into school, day hab, and work? Please share your insights on the following: mask guidelines and travel. Patients asked if it was safe for big groups of people to be together outside that have been vaccinated. And do you recommend for patients to restart in-person therapies once they're fully vaccinated? Should they return to in-office visits using remote visits?
Dr. Millar, you're muted.
There you go. Thank you very much for asking that question, which I believe is a very important, very current event. And like you said, what's in everybody's minds nowadays, in patients and caretakers, families as well. And the one thing that we need to start with is that because there are many changes in people from all over the world in any locations, that we cannot give a cookbook recipe, a blanket statement about what to do. But we can recommend situations to adjust in every particular event. So again, for example, there are a number of things that you have to take into account, which are, first of all, the transmission rates and the vaccination rates in your community. And regardless of this, at least in the USA, the CDC still recommends that for people returning to their workplace environment and returning to school or educational institutions, to keep adhering to 5 key principles, which are to continue to use face masks in closed environments, to continue to wash hands frequently, to keep social distancing when possible, to frequently clean or disinfect surfaces or workplace environments as well, and to try to keep as much ventilation as possible. If possible, the most essential, to keep ventilation from outdoors, meaning trying to keep windows or doors open whenever possible. And the other situation that it needs to be considered is specifically about institutional or educational guidelines in each particular place, which is what plans will be placed whenever a situation arises. For example, what will happen if a student, if a teacher, someone from the staff or from the workplace has a contact that had COVID, is infected, or is showing symptoms that may be suggestive of COVID at the time. What kind of quarantine is going to take into place, what kind of contact tracing will take into effect as well. And talking about gatherings, several factors come into account as well. We know that for people who are fully vaccinated, it's safe to be without masks, even indoors. And when having different scale gatherings, again, there are several factors that need to be taken into account. One is not only the number of people that are going to be joining, because again, we know that depending on each household, there will be smaller or more amount of participants. But it also depends on the vaccination status, if everybody was able to get a vaccine, and from how many households they're going to be joining. If the participation is going to be indoors or outdoors. So outdoors, we always know, is much safer. What kind of activities will they be engaging in? And again, from where is people going to come from which distances? And this is also important because it involves travel and most of transportation. The risk is not going to be the same if there's a family that's going to be sharing a car, if there's going to be trouble going through a bus or train, or even a plane. And again, this has to do with the chances of transmission in different situations. And one factor that's very important is also vaccination status in children. Fortunately and recently, we know that the Pfizer vaccine has been approved for children starting from the age of 12. But still, that's from the age of 12 onwards, not below that age. And we know that the Pfizer vaccine may not be available at all locations. Similarly, looking at that, we know at least from data in New York City that from the amount of people that have been in school when schools reopened since September, we know that there had been around 25,000 cases, and that a little bit over a half of them have been in students, and half of them have been in the staff, in the personnel, which proportionally is a larger amount of people, that meaning the staff of the school, that have been affected by COVID rather than the children. So it seems to be a more environmentally safe situation. So again, I think that to answer this question, you have to keep in mind the vaccination status of people, to keep these 5 key principal roles into place, into effect, and to try to ask and to inquire about in your local institutions, what are the measures that are going to be taken in place in the case of any situation like this arises.
Thank you so much, Dr. Millar, for that sound and practical advice. We understand that the situation might change from place to place, and we're always a resource if you have any follow-up questions, both here at the NYU Dysautonomia Center and the Israeli Center, I'm sure. Now for a question about gut health for Dr. Gonzalez Duarte. Dr. Duarte, for patients who are on long-term antibiotics, what are ways they can improve their gut health to prevent infections like C. diff and alter their microbiome? Looks like Dr. Gonzalez Duarte might be muted as well.
Sorry, this is a very good question, and I think the short answer is to keep it naturally, to get all the food you can have naturally. I mean, having lots of proteins, lots of vegetables, nuts, of course, and try to get your antibiotics with the food. And then, if you are getting or other supplements like lactobacillus, to take them after 1 or 2 hours you took your first antibiotic dose. Did you hear me?
Yes. Thank you so much, Dr. Gonzalez Duarte. Now a question for Dr. Kaufman. Dr. Kaufman, how pervasive is anxiety in the FD population? What are some symptomatic treatments that are in the works to help treat or prevent autonomic crisis?
Very good question, Zenit. First, before answering, I mean, just to smooth things out, let me apologize for that music in the talks from the center. I was unaware of that. I know it was very distracting. I hope that in the post-production that music can come out. It was our mistake. It was done at our center, and it was not checked, the volume. So with that said and that apology, let me try to answer one of these questions. Anxiety is extremely common in FD. I would say that it's extremely common in the world population, and it's even more common in the Jewish population. Now, in patients with FD, is particularly prevalent. And the big problem with people with FD is that anxiety, when they have anxiety, when we all have anxiety, our heart rate goes up, our blood pressure goes up, and we get somewhat restless. Now, in people with FD, the same reaction produces a much more exaggerated response with increasing heart rate, tachycardia, nausea, vomiting, and a very uncomfortable feeling, something that all families know. Some of them know it more frequently, but it's extremely common. I would say that the uncommon thing would be the reverse, a patient with FD without episodes of anxiety. So the classic way, as you're all aware, to treat these was with benzodiazepines and with clonidine. Unfortunately, this is not perfect, and in the long term has unwanted side effects, and the effectiveness goes down. So we hope to start soon a trial that will be a telemedicine trial, and maybe you'll hear about that today, that we can use a compound called dexmedetomidine or Precedex, and we be able to use it sublingual, so people would be able to use it at home with close supervision through telemedicine, at least for the first period, and see if that is more effective than the other treatments we have available. Let me also emphasize that in addition to new treatments, there is a new treatment already available that has been proven in double-blind clinical trials to reduce the frequency and the severity of autonomic crisis, and that is carbidopa. This is an enzymatic inhibitor that prevents the synthesis of the transmitter that the sympathetic system uses to produce the increase in heart rate, the nausea, and the increased blood pressure. So by blocking that chronically, there is a significant reduction in the number and frequency of crises. That, and if we add good pulmonary toilette and good GI toilette, those are already effective measures to reduce crisis. I hope I answered, and I'll be happy to answer any more details.
Thank you so much. A follow-up question that was entered by a member in the chat. Do any FD patients use CBD, cannabis, or medical marijuana, and are there any studies on this? For Dr. Kaufman.
Well, yeah, I'm jumping, and I would like also Pat and Alex to comment on this, because as you know, Israel, or biotechnology in Israel, is at the forefront of studying these cannabinoid receptors. So yes, we have some experience. We tried to do a trial, and we had some regulatory issues, so we haven't done a trial. We do have experience with isolated cases. A good number of patients are taking CBD supplements, and I would say, without this being a control study, that the results have been mixed. Some patients are very encouraged and think that it's helpful. Others don't see a difference. So again, we hope to be able to do a more controlled trial. But the point is that this is a whole new family of receptors that potentially could be useful for the treatment of anxiety in the same way that psilocybin and even MDA and LSD, drugs that traditionally were sort of banned because of political and counterculture wars in the 60s and 70s. Psychiatrists are realizing now that many of these drugs could potentially have an important role in the management of anxiety and mental illness. So I just want to summarize that there is the possibility of these drugs being useful, but more clinical trials and research is needed. Did I answer?
Thank you very much, Dr. Kaufman. Yes, thank you very much, Dr. Kaufman. Now we have a question for an esteemed physician in the Israel chapter, Dr. Bat El Bar. Dr. Bar, how have FD patients responded to the COVID-19 vaccine?
So from the experience that we have, we were very fortunate here in Israel to get the vaccines early. And I think that most of our patients that are up to 12, older than 12 years, are already vaccinated. And at first, the first patient that got vaccine had an autonomic crisis. After that, we implemented the Tylenol from 6 hours after the second dose. Mostly patients got Tylenol, and from that point, I didn't hear any other issues. No autonomic crisis, and everyone did well. I can also say that for some of the patients that we checked antibodies, we saw that there were very, very good levels. We know that there is no problem with the immune system in dysautonomia, and we saw that. And from that point, I even didn't hear of any other new case in Israel. So we were very fortunate here in Israel.
That's really wonderful.
That's fantastic. That's fantastic. But let me just make a comment. I think we are all, I mean, at least in the US and in other countries, learning from the Israeli experience, because I think you guys have already achieved like herd immunity, right? Like 70% of the country is vaccinated. That in the US, that number is far from that. Is that the
that's
case,
quite amazing,
Alex and
because
Bad?
that's true. And previous thoughts were that we had to reach more than 80% to get the herd vaccination, but we got it even before, so that's great.
That's great. So
Yes.
that goes to
so
what
much
Dr. Mijar was saying, that the advice is very dependent on the society where you are, and both Zenith, Kaya, and Patricio, and we are sometimes we may I don't know if exaggerate is the term. I don't want to use that term, but we want to be as protective of the population as possible, and to until the country achieves herd immunity, like Patricio reminded you, we should continue taking all the precautions for knowing that this is transmitted through airdrops.
Even here in
Yes,
Israel,
and
we
thank you
still
so
wear.
much.
Even, can you say that again, Bat?
I said that even in Israel, we still wear masks when we're inside. So
Perfect.
Okay.
That was actually a follow-up question from our viewers. With Israel recommending more masks inside or outside starting on June 15th, which is also mirroring a lot of places throughout the US, do you still recommend wearing one to protect FD patients further? Dr. Barr?
I think that at that point, when we don't have actual data on what happens when we take out the masks, so we still have to be cautious and wear it at least inside. That is my opinion.
And is
I'd like to add a
Jerusalem
little.
doing the same? Is Hadassah doing the same, Alex? Or you
Yeah,
have
we
two
actually.
cities, two policies?
Yeah, sorry. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
What I wanted to say is that I completely agree. In normal times, we did not wear masks inside, but as we progress with this, COVID pandemic, we start to understand maybe wearing masks in any encounter with whether the physician wants to protect themselves or the patients wants to protect themselves or not spread the disease is actually not a bad idea. So I think going forward, we're going to see, as we see actually in the Far East, when you're sick, you wear a mask when you're in public and when you're with a crowd. So, my opinion, at least for the near future, we will still be seeing masks in public.
And to contribute a little bit to
Absolutely.
this topic and with how overprotective we are of our community, uh, as this is a condition that hasn't been dealt with or seen that we have data from before, whenever we take new recommendations, it's always for a vulnerable population to wait a few weeks to see what the response it is to these measures. When I made my video, it was the day before the CDC guidelines changed. And very recently, we've seen that the number of cases have continued to decline, and there haven't been new spikes or increasing cases because they changed the recommendations.
Absolutely. Thank you guys all so much for that. The next question is for Dr. Hillel. Dr. Hillel, how has COVID-19 changed our understanding of patients with FD and their pulmonary health? What are some ways patients can strengthen their lungs and prevent pulmonary complications?
Thank you for this question. Actually, I wanted to take this opportunity to talk a bit about what we know about COVID-19. And the interesting thing is, we as pulmonologists at first were very alerted or very warned that this is going to be our main line of work for the foreseeable future. But we were surprised actually to see that people who had other problems were more vulnerable, and specifically people with blood vessel problems, whether this is diabetic patients or a patient with cardiovascular disease. And the more we understand this virus, the more we know that people with their arteries or blood vessels that are damaged are more vulnerable to this disease. But this is as a side note, because we all know that FD patients were not hurt as much by this disease, and excluding the very unfortunate case under our care at Hadassah of a young woman who passed from COVID complications. Our patients had this pretty mildly. And going back to the question about pulmonary status, we all know that there is a pulmonary component to COVID-19, and the better you come facing it, the better you will come out of it. And since FD patients have all what we call bronchiectatic disease, or many of them have bronchiectatic disease, that is a disease of the airways that are damaged by whether it's reflux or recurrent infections, the best way to protect it is to clean them. And as many patients do, they have cough assist to assist them with devices that assist them with the coughing. They have physiotherapy They have inhalations with hypertonic saline to clear the lungs better. And I think these are the recommendations we give to our patients every year. But this year has put a spotlight on it, saying that we should keep the lungs of our patients even in better condition. And again, the same measures, but probably more important than ever.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Dr. Hillel. Dr. Kaufman, a question that was entered from our audience after your great presentation today on the new genes found is, if only one parent tests positive for the FD gene by J-screen, can the child still have FD from those parents, considering other less common variants have been found that can combine with in a heterozygous form of FD?
You know, that's a great question. And you see, until not that long ago, the answer would have been that both parents have to be carriers. And in that case, they have 25% chance of having a child that receive the mutated copy of each parent. And as you're aware, the parent is only a carrier, has only one copy. So you would say, well, if only one parent has the FD mutation, the child has no chance of getting that. However, and that's the usefulness of the question, the reality now is that in addition to the founder mutation, and that they call the small mutation, that there are like 9 patients that have it, and was described in like 2003, there are now 3 more mutations that clearly are pathogenic when combined with the founder. So I would say that in theory, yes, if one of the parents has the founder mutation and the other parent is not tested for one of the new mutations, there is that possibility that a child would be heterozygous, but that both genes would be defective. The new mutations, as I tried to explain, one appears to have originated in Africa and the other originated in Europe. So that's why we have these 2 new patients that if they would have had testing, the parents would have had testing before the child, only one parent would have had the founder mutation, and it would have considered that they were home free, and they were not. So I believe it's important to test for these new mutations. How common they are, we don't know. Those are the questions that we asked to Sue and Elisabetta and Gadi, which works on these big databases on how common this is. But I think we will be finding that out. So the short answer is, in theory, yes. If one of the patients has the founder mutation and the other doesn't, there is a very rare, and we don't know how rare, the possibility that the other person, being of Jewish ancestry, or not being of Jewish ancestry, could have another new mutation.
Fantastic. Thank you so much to all of our panelists, and thank you to all the caregivers and patients who submitted your questions. We'll be wrapping up the Q&A portion now, but please do not hesitate to contact us individually or if you have any unanswered questions. The next part of our program is something that's very special to us all and something I've been looking forward to all day, and we will be talking about the Distinguished Awards.
Each year, we nominate individuals with FD whom we want to recognize because they're courageous and brave and meet and transcend. Our Distinguished Awards are going to be people who do not let FD stand in the way of what they want to achieve. Please welcome this year's honorees representing the US, England, and Israel.
My name is Avi Zimels and I have FD.
Hi, I'm Rebecca and I have FD.
My name is Ron and I have FD.
Hello, my name is Kelly Borman, and I have familial dysautonomia, but that does not define me, and you should not let it define you either.
What do you like to do?
I lead them. I put their reins on.
During my spare time, I like talking to my friends, hanging with my family, going on walks, like going out, like shopping. I mean, I'm not the biggest shopping person, but I like the experience, like going out and like doing something.
My spare time, I'm reading a little. I'm also collecting stamps and starting the history of Israel. I'm really enjoying it.
I'm a comedy writer. I think I started when I was 26, and I started writing comedy sketches because I saw someone's comedy sketches, and I thought they were kind of gross. So I wanted to do my own, and I also love doing ceramics. I made this wolf out of clay. I'm glad I was able to start ceramics again. First teacher said I couldn't do it because of my size and condition. I proved them wrong.
How have you been spending your time during the pandemic?
Here with my sisters more. We do art together. Me and two of my cousins made a virtual magic show.
So I recently graduated from college with magna cum laude with a degree in communications and minor in digital marketing. Because I was still in school for most of it, that kept me very occupied because I had classes like the whole week and like work, etc.
But this pandemic was, I know how tragic and awful it was. It opened my eyes to the wonders of the kitchen. Cooking more. This morning, for example, I tried to make a Japanese rice ball. I also started working on a screenplay.
I'm not studying, I'm seeing lectures online via Zoom.
What are you looking forward to as things begin to open up?
Having my friends round.
I would love to find a part-time job in marketing and communication fields. Probably just seeing more people in person and instead of online. I'm really excited to see what's next, like in the adult world, possibly living on my own at some point. Yeah, like just experiencing new things.
Going into movie theaters. And hopefully I get to volunteer again at the local Jewish Federation. And giving people hugs without a mask. That too.
Going to museums, going to the mall, going around, starting traveling again, especially like to travel to the north, to Kinneret, to the Dead Sea, also to Ashkelon.
What advice do you have for people living with FD?
I know sometimes the struggle is real and scary, but never give up. Just meditate, relax.
And trying to be as happy as you can. To be with experience as much as you can and staying busy, learning, do music.
Be brave, be positive, always look for the good in every way. Every challenge is a mountain to climb. Sometimes the climb is harder, but if you try hard enough, you will reach the summit.
What advice do you have for people with FD who are heading off to college?
Everyone with FD is different, so do what's right for you. I know when in college and you have multiple classes, it can feel a lot sometimes. So I would just say take your time at your own pace, like you can get it done, and like ask for help if you ever need it.
Try. We're having a little bit of a connection instability issue. Can you hear us?
You're good. Go ahead.
Okay. And now we will move on to this year's art competition that's been expanded upon from previous years to include more art forms. Dr. Lucy Norcliffe Kaufman started the World Through Our Eyes photography competition many years ago as a way to showcase the unique stories that people with FD had to share with the world. Many thanks are given also to Rick Guidotti for joining us and continuing this beautiful tradition this year.
Hello, my name is Dr. Kaya Dalamo. I'm one of the nurse practitioners at the Dysautonomia Center. As someone who has had the pleasure to get to know the people living with familial dysautonomia, and as a fellow artist, it's been a true honor to host this year's annual art competition. The center has hosted the World Through My Eyes, an annual photography competition for FD Day since 2009 to encourage personal expression, passion, joy, and what it's like to live with FD. We also partnered with Rick Guidotti to host this year.
Hi everybody, I'm Rick Guidotti, founder of Positive Exposure. I'm so excited to be part of this incredible artistic initiative where 15 artists from the FD community submitted artwork with themes of like self-empowerment and self-identity and exploration and transformation and freedom and unconditional love. It's extraordinary artwork, and I'm so thrilled to be able to host this exhibition in our gallery on Museum Mile as soon as it's safe for all of us to gather. Thank you so much.
This year, in recognition of the diverse talents of our community, we decided to expand the photography competition to include all art forms. We had an overwhelmingly positive response to this and an unprecedented number of participants and submissions. And like every year, we invited a panel of accomplished, internationally known gallery curators and professional artists to help judge this year's competition and provide insightful commentary and review of all pieces. For all of us, it was a joy to sit with each piece and take the time to appreciate all the time, work, and talent that went into this year's show. So we invite all of you as our audience to please visit the dysautonomiacenter.com website or blog page following today's show to view all submissions in their entirety at your own pace, how they're intended to be seen, to get lost in their diverse and unique beauty. Now, for the show of brilliant artists with commentary offered by our esteemed judges. I hope you all enjoy. Alexia de Gunsberg's abstract is bold, with vibrant use of colors, which, as they mesh into each other, she created a centripetal force that both draws you into the center, at the same time inviting you to view it in its wondrous, colorful entirety. You can tell she's excited to let colors intersect. We appreciate the boldness. She is gifted and should continue to experiment working with color and water. Franny Cohen managed to capture moods from both owner and her pets in this one photograph. Being at home during the pandemic can be very isolating. She was really feeling here. The perspective and composition is very interesting. She's positioned above her dogs, but also very near to them. And their eyes are captivating. You can feel the warmth, love, and trust of their relationship here. This self-portrait by Gabby Jassy is brave art. It is vitally important to be shameless and to actually enjoy your problems. Letting people know, this is me, this is how I do it. Bravery to express the self. The opposite of living with stigma is living with self-love and pride, and Gabby captures this here. Her portrait literally is energizing. Yvonne Zelion is our youngest contestant, and at a very young age, he is showing sophistication and complexity. Numerous judges commented on the drawing's sophistication and balanced layers. This is a thoughtful expression of complexity. When considering this as a form of writing, the art becomes a narrative, a sentence. He is talking about the house fish with the lines. It's a metaphysical composition. Judges compared his work to the famous Uruguayan Spanish painter Joaquin Torres Garcia, and all agree it is important to keep Ivan creating. The colors in this still life by Jackie Goldberg are bright, exciting, and vivid. The composition is beautiful, which is tied to Jackie's loveliness and to her bright personality from Southern California. This short video, Self-Portrait by Joshua Keats, is very expressive, creative, and portrays Josh's great sense of humor. Titled One of Those Days, it gives us interiority. Josh is revealing an aspect of living with FD and a look at himself with raw objectivity, humor, playfulness, and positivity, and in doing so is reclaiming his identity even through one of those days. The judges compared his work to the famous Irish artist Francis Bacon, a contemporary artist who also rejected classical standards and strove to render the brutality of fact. Justin Sachs' use of color and brushstrokes is bold and expressive. The strokes are vigorous, purposeful, and lend an animated end result that appears to be alive. With the limited amount of colors he chose and limited amount of lines, he was thorough in what he wanted to convey in this image. There's a tension to the eyes, maybe even an expression of pain, and there's a tension to a tilt in the lion's neck, as well as in Justin's portrait of the playful pup, which is featured online in the full gallery after the show. They tell a story. Through all this, the painting is not overworked. He knew when to finish, and the result is beautiful. That shows signs of a very methodical and mature artist, and judges encourage him to continue painting. Justin's got chops as an artist, they said. Keshi Taryan Kegel's conceptual art is an expression of tenacity, an expression that no matter what, she knows how to live. In terms of presentation, the opaque imagery with overlying text feels very modern, like the pop art of Roy Lichtenstein. And the dialogue between words again and again and again and again, photo and objects interact conceptually to create a hypnotic effect that many experienced in our repetitive routines at home during the pandemic. Laura Clausen's digital painting of a young female in a mask is the best document of our current time. She paints a woman who appears to be smiling with her eyes, even though her mouth cannot be seen because she's wearing a mask. She also is surrounded by words that could equally be interpreted as laugh and cough, which expresses our mixture of love and respect for each other and our concern for our safety and the safety of others in these times. Mara's use of colors is also beautiful, and the way she paints the woman's chest and plants in the background suggests the appearance of the wings of an angel. Peter Sonnenschein's painting, Queen's Gambit, embodies the European style of expressionism. The imagery is large and centered. It occupies the whole space. Peter has a good eye for design and color. This is even more remarkable because Peter, like many others with FD, is legally blind. Elements of the subject of this painting, the popular TV icon, have been abstracted. The position of her hands and the ferocity of her gaze are intriguing, pulling you closer into her game where she will win. Also, the parallels the painting's subject has to the artist as an underdog who overcomes great adversity is compelling. Judges encouraged Peter to paint even larger. It would be like a wrestling match for him that he could consume himself with, as in a battle. He should attempt a small mural. It would be empowering for him to recreate a painting he did smaller on a large space to broaden the expression. Though Peter Sonnenschein chose Queen's Gambit as his favorite submission, and the judges' reaction to it was just as favorable, this self-portrait also deserves a very honorable mention. Because it's a self-portrait, Peter's self-portrait is brilliant and powerful, and the use of this quote by baseball legend Babe Ruth is a motto for all of us to live by. In spite of fear, Peter plays the game. Rachel Eisenson's graphic design image, Floating in a Galaxy of Love, is crafty and clever at the same time that it's fanciful, playful, and whimsical. Rachel has the talent and ability to create customized art for fellow dog lovers. She should explore the creation of a business and personalized merchandise, including greeting cards, wallpaper, curtain design. Images like these would look beautiful and fun if printed large on translucent linen for personalized curtains. Rebecca Newman's painting, entitled Friends Reunited, is of a silhouetted pair of sea turtles floating eye to eye at sea. It is bright and uplifting. Also, the use of stark contrast of black on the colors of the water upon first glance could also appear to be a large eye, like the whole painting is looking back at us, including the viewer and the reunited friendship. The colors of the water are also very welcoming. Sam Landau's video deserves to be watched in its entirety. It is masterfully wrought, using different landscapes, is well-directed, impeccably edited, and is conceptually stunning. The concept is clear that there's a notion of reversing reality and escape, and if we try to escape too much, we could lose reality and then want it back. The viewer gets a sense that the noises Sam now hears are things he wishes he could have back, like a cheering crowd or a pool full of happy, splashing kids, but all we're left with is calm and silence. Sam offers a reminder to be present. Sam Meyer's photo is a collaboration in more senses than one. Sam is seen here as if she's flying, as she sits in a wheelchair. One aspect of the photo is firmly grounded, while the wings suggest another reality made possible by friendship. The partnership enables Sam to achieve anything she sets her mind to. And finally, Veronica Segal's collage is an advertisement for cultural consumption during the COVID-19 crisis. It is a poster advertising what we all did in COVID. Veronica was resourceful and found solace and entertainment using technology by seeing her family and friends virtually, streaming movies, and practicing her meditative skills using the Calm app. Her collage serves as a social diary of our pandemic experience and the value of technology answering our needs for distraction, entertainment, and connection with other people. Our screens have become a vital organ.
And the winners of the 2021 The World Through My Eyes art competition, Ivan Zilioni, Peter Sonnenschein, and Sam Landau.
Thank you very much for everyone participating in this year's annual FD art competition. It's been a joy and an honor to receive these wonderful submissions from our community, and we hope that you've all enjoyed them too. Make sure to view all submissions and full videos at our blog page, dysautonomiacenter.com. Thank you very much.
That was absolutely amazing. Congratulations to our distinguished award winners and to all of our talented artists. And thanks especially to nurse practitioner Kaya Dalamo and to Rick Godoti of Positive Exposure for organizing this year's art competition. So enjoyable and so inspirational. The next section of today's program will focus on FD research. We are very fortunate to have many brilliant and dedicated scientists working to enhance and extend the lives of people with FD. Today we will hear about some of the exciting and cutting-edge research underway. I am pleased to welcome Dr. Adrian Gilbert, FD parent from Israel, pharmaceutical executive, and co-chair of the Foundation's Scientific Advisory Board.
Thank you, Lainey. Firstly, I want to say that I was just blown away by the art and the distinguished FD awards. I have to say, I wasn't expecting that, and I found it very touching. And if I didn't need motivation and inspiration, I got it from watching that. And well done to everyone who contributed to that. So thank you, Lainey, and thanks everyone for staying with us to hear our research updates and our panel discussion. My name is Adrian Gilbert. I'm originally from England. I've been living in Israel for over 30 years. And in my day job, I work in pharmaceutical development for a company called Neuroderm in Israel. And we're working on new treatments for Parkinson's disease. But I also am the father of Tamar, age 20, who I know is watching, who has FD. So working with this scientific advisory board is really a place where my worlds collide, and it really is a huge privilege. And we have a great group that we work with. So just to remind you, we renewed our scientific advisory board at the end of 2019, and that already seems like a long time ago, pre-COVID. And here in the slide, you can see basically the makeup of our group now. We're a good mixture of scientists, clinical researchers, and also from industry. Frances and I are the co-chairs, and I have to say it's been a true pleasure to work with Frances. She's a great scientist and a really good collaborator who's always volunteering, probably more than me. And I think we have a really nice group get together, and we're starting to see some results, and I think it's been a real privilege for us. We've actually had now 3 full meetings of our advisory board. The last was in early May, just a few weeks ago. And we've been following and supporting different research programs coming out of the US, Italy, Israel, and Japan, and across a range of modalities and approaches. We're really excited by the energy and obviously the progress, which is the most important thing. And today we're going to give you, I think, a bit of a taste of what's going on and what's happened in the last year. So we'll kick off today's session with my co-chair, Dr. Frances Lefcourt, from Montana State University. Will give us an overview of some of the current leading research programs into FD. Frances.
Thanks very much, Adrian. Thanks to all of you. It's a pleasure to be here virtually with everyone to celebrate FD Day. And I also sort of am wearing 2 hats. I'm a neuroscientist and I study FD, but I also am a cousin. I had 2 cousins in Montreal who had FD, and so it's something that I care deeply about. And it's been a pleasure, likewise, working with Adrian. He's a fabulous collaborator, and the whole scientific advisory board actually has been just a real pleasure and an honor to work with everyone. Okay, so today, I thought I would give a brief update on some current exciting research developments on FD that we are hopeful, at least some of them, can lead to treatments. Can I have the next slide, please? So how do we get there? So our goal, as you've heard today, is to increase levels of this protein called ELP1. It used to be called ICAP, but we're referring to it as ELP1 now. And ELP1 in FD, the level of ELP1 is reduced. So that's the goal, is to increase levels of ELP1. So how do we get there? It's a collaboration between all of us. So we need to all work together, the FD families, the FD Foundation and the Scientific Advisory Board, the wonderful FD clinicians we have at NYU and in Israel, the FD research scientists that, for me, it's been a privilege to work with. And we really have to thank the National Institutes of Health because they have funded many of our grants. And so it's, for you Americans, it's your tax dollars at work. And lastly, we have to thank NLORM. I mean, Adrian Craner will tell you about a very exciting development with his research, and NLORM is a private foundation, and they are going to help us tremendously getting the first treatment into an FD patient. Next slide, please. Okay, so how do we get there? How do we get to treatment? So there's kind of a roadmap you can think about. First, it started on the bottom left circle, the gene and the mutation, which we are so lucky to have Susan Slagenhaupt in our group. She is an amazing geneticist at Harvard and MGH, and she, with Jim Gazella, identified the original gene and the mutation, the founder mutation that Dr. Kaufman described, and the other mutations that have been described. Once you have the mutation, then you can start making animal models. And many of us have chosen mouse. And so you can introduce the mutation or delete the gene. There are different ways to do it, but you can make a mouse model that then can be used to, one, understand what's going wrong in FD, what's happening to the neurons, and two, use these mice to test potential therapeutics. And then if things look good in mice, then we can try to translate that to patients and test in clinical trials. And so that's sort of the roadmap for most of us. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so what is the problem in FD? So as all of you know, our genes are made up of DNA, and that DNA needs to be copied to RNA, and then that mRNA has to be decoded or translated to make protein, okay? So in FD, there's a problem. We have a mutation in the DNA. So if I can have the next slide, please. So you can see in the DNA that's highlighted in the circle, there's one nucleotide or base. So each of those letters are called bases or nucleotides, and one of them is mutated. And right now I'm talking about the founder mutation, but you can just use this as a general principle for what's going on in FD. So because of that one mutation, one base being different, there's a problem making the messenger RNA. And if there's a problem making messenger RNA, we're going to have reduced levels of the ELP1 protein. Okay, can I have the next slide, please? So this problem of making the messenger RNA is called splicing. Okay, so we have a problem in splicing. And to understand splicing, I thought we could think about the theme song from Sesame Street. So if you look at the two lines on the bottom, you can see there are red words there, but separating the red words are a bunch of these nucleotides or bases, okay? So in that noise, you can see though that, you know, there's the beginning of our Sesame Street theme song, you know, sunny days sweeping the clouds away. Okay, so we want to distinguish the words sunny days sweeping the clouds away from all those other bases or nucleotides, okay? So how do we do that? So if I could have the next slide. So you can see all those scissors. So there's actually a cutting process that takes place called splicing, where we splice, we separate, we cut the words that we want in our theme song and the parts of the DNA we want for to end up in being copied into our messenger RNA, and then the parts that we don't need, okay? So can I have the next slide? Okay, so again, that process of cutting is called splicing. And as a result, we are left with the important parts of the RNA, which are called the exons, okay? So we keep the exons and we get rid of the introns. And if you remember, Dr. Kaufman mentioned that these new mutations arose from doing an exome search. So that was searching all the exons to see if there were any problems. Okay, can I have the next slide, please? Okay, so remember though, in FD, we have a mutation in one of those bases. And you can see here, I'm just highlighting a potential mutation after the word clouds, okay? So imagine if there was a mutation there after the word clouds, and that prevented those scissors from working well to cut out that word clouds, which is an important part of the Sesame Street theme song, and imagine it's an important part of the gene for ELP1. Okay, can I have the next slide? So if we can't cut the word clouds out, we get this kind of meaningless message, right? We get sunny days sweeping the away. Well, what does that mean? That doesn't make a lot of sense. Can I have the next slide? So as a result of that one mutation, we aren't getting a normal version of the Sesame Street theme song. And in our case, we aren't going to get normal levels of the messenger RNA for ELP1. And so we're going to have reduced levels of the ELP1 protein. And that's our problem. So can I have the next slide, please? So what's the solution? The solution is to increase the inclusion of that missing exon. So like the word clouds, so that the ELP1 messenger RNA can be made properly. And luckily, we have two brilliant scientists working with us. They're both on the scientific advisory board and they have active research programs and who are trying to fix that splicing problem. Okay, so one of them is Dr. Adrian Krainer, who's at Cold Spring Harbor Labs. And he, in his lab, developed a solution that fixes that splicing using a method called antisense oligonucleotides. And he'll be talking about that. And he has formed this collaboration with Dr. Kaufman, with NLORM, this foundation, to try one of Adrian Krainer's these ASOs in a patient with FD. And this is absolutely, it's a new day. This is such an exciting and important development. And I'm personally so thankful to Dr. Krainer for doing this. And then we also have Dr. Susan Slagenhop at Mass General and Harvard Medical School, who has done an incredible series of elegant studies identifying small molecules in collaboration with the company PTC Therapeutics that have identified small molecules that can also increase the splicing process and lead to increasing levels of the ELP1 protein. She's going to talk about that, and she also has a second strategy working with a great scientist in Italy, Dr. Franco Pagani, on these U1 sRNAs that also can increase splicing. So next slide, please. In my lab, we're trying a different approach. Our approach is what's called gene therapy, where you introduce into a neuron a healthy copy of the ELP1 gene. And this is a project that we are doing in collaboration with two terrific scientists, Dr. Claudio Punzo, who's at University of Massachusetts Medical School, and Dr. Elisabetta Marini, who's working with Sue Slagenhop's group at Mass General. So it's still, I'm going to show you a tiny bit of data. I can tell you that we are still optimizing our methods, but we're starting to get some promising results, and it's early, but I wanted to share them with you. Oh, I'm going to do that in the research talk, sorry. So you'll hear more about that in a few minutes. Let's go to the last slide. The last slide is another approach happening in my lab where we're wondering about whether there's a problem with metabolism in general in people with FD. So for example, metabolism is a result of many factors, but it's turning out that one of the factors that can influence our metabolism is the communication between all the bacteria that live in our guts, which is also called the microbiome, and the brain. And it turns out those bacteria in our gut and our brain communicate like crazy. And they communicate with the liver, which plays a key role in metabolism. And together they can influence our overall health, our digestion, our nutrient balance, and our overall metabolism. And so I'm working with two fabulous scientists at MSU, Seth Walk and Valerie Copier. And together we've been collaborating with the Dysautonomia Center, with Dr. Kaufman and Maria and Lucy, and all of you families with FD family members who are sending us samples. And we're starting to find disturbances in the metabolism, and we're writing up those data now, and I'll tell you more about that later. And I think there's maybe one last slide. So I want to thank you all very much, and I'm going to hand it back, I think, to Adrian now.
Yes. Yes, we have a very rare occasion where there's two Adrians, an Adrian Gilbert and, of course, Adrian Craner. So I hope you can keep track. Thank you, Francis. I think we got what was an excellent presentation. So we have three directions that we're trying to use here, or being trying to use by the researchers to modify how our ELP1 protein is spliced. And what we're actually going to hear now from the three researchers, Sue, Francis about gene therapy, Sue about small molecules, and Adrian about the antisense oligos. They're going to give us a bit more insight into their approaches. And I think we're very, very lucky to have such high caliber researchers working on our field. So without further words, I'll go straight to Sue, who's going to talk about her small molecule approaches.
Thank you so much, Adrian. And thank you, Francis, for that beautiful introduction to all of our work. I'm really, really pleased to be here today. I'd like to begin by introducing my remarkable FD team. So this is typically what you're seeing on this slide is what we look like during the pandemic when we have lab meetings. I want to assure you that they're all in the lab working very hard, but we have our lab meetings virtually. So from the top left is Daddy Gao. Then myself, as you can see, then Emily Kirshner, Anil Chakuri, Emily Logan, Elisabetta Marini, Ricardo Harapal, who just joined our team a few days ago, and Jess Bolduc. They're really responsible for all of the remarkable work that we do on FD, and I hope that you'll join me in thanking them for all of their hard work. This year marks 30 years for me at Mass General, which I find a little hard to believe. But that means that I've been working on FD for just about as long, so almost 30 years. So we've made tremendous progress. We still have a ways to go, but I'm very, very excited about all of the work that you'll hear today. Can I have the next slide, please? So as Francis explained, FD is caused by a splicing mutation that causes incomplete exclusion of exon 20 in the ELP1 gene. And this leads to patients not having enough ELP1 protein, particularly in their nervous system. Next slide, please. So how can we treat FD? One way is to increase the inclusion of exon 20, as Francis explained, which will increase the amount of ELP1 protein, as I'm showing on this slide. What we need to accomplish is increased ELP1 protein. And today you'll hear about 3 different methods that we are working on to do this. So the next slide, please. My lab is focused on developing a small molecule oral drug that will increase exon 20 inclusion. Starting with kinetin, that you all have heard about over the years, we've been funded by the NINDS Blueprint for Neurotherapeutics Network, which led to the creation of a much more effective compound shown in the middle. And then we partnered with PTC Therapeutics to continue the development of a drug. which led to the creation of a compound that is 10,000 times more potent than kinetin. This drug can get into the brain and increase levels of ELP1 protein in our mice. And just last month, we received the good news that this drug also passed the first steps in the required safety testing. So as you all know, PTC Therapeutics canceled their clinical development program for FD in 2019. However, they have pledged to partner with my team, with the FD Foundation, as well as with the FD Center to map out a path to bring this promising treatment to FD patients. So stay tuned as we move this forward. Next slide, please. Another method that we're working on was created by Dr. Franco Pagani, whose lab is in Italy. Franco has identified a way to modify an important component of the splicing machinery, and he makes it match the FD mutation, which also leads to inclusion of exon 20. So we're continue to work with Franco on this method of treating FD. And in my lab, we're focused on testing this method in our mice by treating the retinas. And so our goal is to see if we can rescue splicing in the retina and prevent the loss of retinal ganglion cells and hopefully prevent blindness. And then the last slide, please. So in closing, I just want to reiterate that all of the exciting work that you'll hear about today has been possible because all of the FD researchers continue to work collaboratively. Coming up with a treatment that targets the molecular defect in FD will take all of us working together. And with the leadership that Francis and Adrian have provided, I think that we are working well along this path. But it will also take all of you. We're working to advance all of these potential treatments at the same time. We're not choosing one over another. We're pushing forward with all of them with the goal of getting something to patients quickly. And when the time comes, we'll need all of you to be ready to participate in clinical trials so that we can finally determine if increasing the level of ELP1 protein in patients will benefit. So thank you. I look forward to continuing to hear the rest of the talks and to participating in the question and answer session at the end. And now I believe I turn it directly over to Francis.
Okay, thank you, Sue. That was terrific talk, and I just love your work. It's so promising. Okay, so I'm going to just give a brief update on our work trying to introduce a healthy copy of the ELP1 gene in the retina. And, you know, as Sue mentioned, we know in FD, you know, there are issues that we hope to help all through the body: cardiovascular problems, the autonomic crises, the ataxia. So we know we're well aware of all these problems, and we really want to hopefully address all of them, but we need something very measurable, something we can quantify and see progress quickly, and so or clearly. And one way to do that is to start with the eye. And you know, I know for my cousin, when he, you know, he, like all of you with FD, he was so brave and struggled so long, and, you know, with all the autonomic problems. But when he started losing his vision, it really sapped his spirit, and that was a real struggle. And so that, to me, convinced me to really start to focus on the retina. So what you're seeing here is an actual picture of a retina in a mouse, taken by a fabulous graduate student in my lab, Anastasia Schultz. And in the arrows are pointing to those purple round balls. And those purple round balls are called retinal ganglion cells. And those are the actual neurons that die in FD. And these are the cells all of us who are working on the retina are trying to save. Because if we can save those cells, those purple cells, surrounded by the green support cells called glia, if we can keep those purple cells alive, then nobody will lose their vision in FD. Okay, can I have the next slide, please? Okay, so now you're seeing a picture of an eye, And in the back of the eye, in blue, turquoise, now you're seeing the retinal ganglion cells. So in turquoise are sort of 5 retinal ganglion cells I've put there. And what's important to notice is those retinal ganglion cells, they extend long processes that are called axons, okay? And those axons form the optic nerve. And it's those axons that will travel all the way to the brain that communicate all the visual information you see. So the visual information comes into the light comes into your eye, and because of the way the cells in the retina work, they start to make meaning out of all those photons of light, and then they send that information to the brain through those axons, okay? So if anything happens to those retinal ganglion cells, bodies, or to their axons, we aren't going to see. And here I have a blue arrow pointing to all these beautiful children that had FD. I think all those children are adults now. But anyway, we won't see those beautiful children, and we won't see all that gorgeous art that all of you with FD are making. So we know that this is very important to save these retinal ganglion cells and their axons. Okay, next slide, please. All right, so I apologize for this slide. It's not perfect for this talk, but if you can focus on what we're seeing here is a count of retinal ganglion cells in different mouse eyes that have received different concentrations of the ELP1 gene in the virus, or of just a control, or their control eyes, or their mutant eyes. Okay, that's all mixed in here. But the important thing to notice is if you look at the third gray bar there from the left side, that you can see that bar is a little bit higher than the bars next to it, okay? It's not as high as the tallest bars on the right, but it's a little bit higher, and it's statistically significant than the others. It's about 14% higher. So, which means we are starting to rescue some retinal ganglion cells. So we have a little bit more retinal ganglion cells. And this was done before we'd even optimized the injection procedure. And this is work done by a graduate student in the lab, Colin King. But I want to tell you the exciting thing we found, and that's on the next slide. Next slide, please. Is we think we're starting to save axons, okay? So if you look in the top panel, you're seeing pictures of retinas from 3 different mice. The one on the left, you can see the yellow arrow is pointing to some axons. That's in a control wild type mouse. The picture in the middle is from a mutant retina that is not making the ELP1 protein, and you can see, you don't see any axons there. And then the one on the right with the yellow arrow pointing to it, you can start to see some axons again. And that's a mutant that was treated with one of the concentrations of the ELP1 gene. And then on the bottom panel, you can see these axons in higher magnification. And so you can see on the left side in the control, nice healthy axons. In the middle that did not get the ELP1 gene, you're not seeing axons. But in the panel on the right, which is from a mutant that did get the ELP1 gene, we're starting to get some axons. And so we don't know what this means. It could mean a few different things, but we're pursuing this, and we're hoping that this is an indication that this approach might be helpful for preserving those retinal ganglion cells and preventing them from dying. And then lastly, if I could have the last slide. I just want to thank everyone. I want to thank the National Eye Institute at the NIH for funding this work. Thank the wonderful people in my lab, especially Marta Chavera and Colin King and Anastasia Schultz, who've been doing this work, and our fabulous collaborator who helped us with the design of the vectors to be used here and how to analyze the retina, Claudio Punzo at University of Mass Medical School. So that's it. And I think I get to introduce my esteemed colleague, Dr. Adrian Craner.
Thank you so much, Francis. It's such a pleasure to participate in FD Day this year. So I'm Adrian Craner. I work at Cold Spring Harbor Laboratory in Long Island, and where I've been for 35 years this year. And my lab specializes in the process that Francis introduced, RNA splicing, and we also use antisense technology to try to develop therapeutics for rare diseases. So I want to introduce today our efforts to develop an antisense oligonucleotide for FD. Next slide, please. So what are antisense oligonucleotides, or ASOs? They are short, synthetic, single-stranded nucleic acids, meaning DNA-like and RNA-like, and they bind to an mRNA target by base pairing, the same forces that hold the two strands of DNA together. At the bottom on the right, you see an antisense oligonucleotide. You can see that it's short. It has a few nucleotides as building blocks. And a little above that is a messenger RNA, which has the same type of information, but it's a longer molecule. And then between the two is a duplex. In other words, these two strands, the mRNA and the ASO, can find each other because of the sequence and form this duplex or helix. So the sequence of an ASO determines to which mRNA it binds and exactly where along that mRNA it will bind. Now, if we design an ASO in such a way that it binds to an mRNA before it undergoes RNA splicing, then the ASO can affect how splicing occurs. In the instance that we're all interested in, the goal is to restore efficient splicing of exon 20 in ELP1 with the FD mutation. And I should also mention that compared to RNA or DNA, the nucleic acids, ASOs have special chemical modifications that make them more drug-like. Next slide, please. So this outlines the entire development process for an ASO drug called nusinersen or Spinraza that we developed several years ago in collaboration with Ionis Pharmaceuticals and later with Biogen. And so you can see the different stages there in preclinical development and then clinical development. And my lab at Cold Spring Harbor was involved in the preclinical stages, which is shown there in orange. So you can see the timeline, which is fairly extended. And so actually in our work on the FD ASO, we have pretty much finished that preclinical stage. Indeed, a couple of years ago or more, we were already done. And the challenge that we have faced is how to take it to the next stage, clinical development. And the challenge, as you know, is that FD is a very rare disease. Compared to SMA, the drug for which nusinersen was developed, SMA is 100 to 1,000 times more prevalent than FD. And so it's in this case, FD, it's harder to motivate biotech and pharma to invest in clinical development. But we think that we are now in a great position to do so, and also that the timeline for clinical development will be much faster than in this earlier case, which was the first application of an ASO of this type. But you should know that nusinersen was approved at the end of 2016 by the FDA. It's already been in more than 11,000 patients with SMA. So the next stages are large-scale manufacture and then testing for safety and tolerability in animals, for example, in monkeys. And then later, interacting with the Food and Drug Administration to get authorization to begin to test such a drug in a small number of patients to begin to test its real efficacy in the clinic. May I have the next slide, please? So these are the ASOs of this type that modify splicing that are currently in clinical use. And so they include nusinersen for spinal muscular atrophy, which is a motor neuron disease, and then three other drugs, eteplirsen, golodirsen, and viltolarsen, which were developed for Duchenne muscular dystrophy. Next slide, please. So this shows the sequence, the nucleotide sequence of nusinersen or Spinraza, and below that, that of the ASO that we have developed for familial dysautonomia. So importantly, these two molecules have the exact same chemical building groups, so the chemistry is the same. The difference, of course, is the actual sequence, and also slightly longer in the case of the FD ASO. And the sequences, if you recall, dictate to which mRNA each of these molecules binds. So the FD-ASO is designed to bind to the mRNA from the ELP1 gene. Spinraza or nusinersen binds to the mRNA from a gene called SMN2. Next slide, please. So fortunately, there's a new foundation called NLOREM, which is a branch, in a sense, of Ionis Pharmaceuticals. And their mission is to bring ASO technology and ASO drugs to patients with ultra-rare diseases. And what's on their radar are diseases where there's somewhere between 1 and 10 patients with that disease, so it's not a commercially viable opportunity. So FD is certainly more than that, so we face that challenge, but I'm happy to say that we have formally applied to NLOREM to work with us on this, and the application was submitted by Dr. Kaufman, and it has been accepted. So if I can have the next slide, please. So they have formally agreed to work with us to help with the clinical development of the FD-ASO. This application was approved on March 23 of this year, and Dr. Kaufman and I already had the kickoff call with the NLOREM representatives just a few days ago, May 26th. And so these are the next steps. New designs based on that lead molecule whose sequence I showed you will be prepared to compare to that ASO and select the best clinical candidate. And so this comparison will be based on activity assays that are done in cells and one of the mouse models that Dr. Slagenhaupt developed. In addition, these candidates will be compared in terms of the tolerability when they are injected into mice and rats. And then a full tox study will be carried out by NLOREM and Ionis Pharmaceuticals. And so this is the main way in which they are supporting the next steps. And if all goes according to plan, it should be possible to dose the first patient with the clinical candidate in the second half of next year, and this would be done by Dr. Kaufman's team at NYU Langone. So we're very excited that we've reached this point finally, and that we are working with NLOREM's help. And so that's all I wanted to tell you today, but I look forward to the Q&A and the panel, which I believe follows this. Thank you so much for your attention.
Well, thank you all. I think we're really blessed to have such high caliber researchers and such promising directions. I'd like to thank each of our presenters, Francis, Sue, and Adrian. And I also think we've reached a very, very exciting moment with the support of NLOREM, that the antisense oligo looks like it can be in clinical next year, and we have support for that to bring it through the preclinical testing, which is an amazing milestone. And thank you to Adrian and to Horacio for achieving that. So what we're going to do now is we're going to hold a Q&A with our panel, as you can see them, who have presented. And we've, of course, we've got Dr. Horacio Kaufman from the Treatment Center in New York to join us. And we hope that these directions are going to be translated into clinical activities and clinical trials in the not too distant future. So if anyone has questions that you'd like to ask about what you've heard or about other things, please post them on the chat. I have one eye that I've been looking, and I know my SAB colleague Adam is following up carefully on those questions. But what we thought we'll do is we'll kick it off with some questions which we've already received. So I'm going to start with a question for Adrian, who made the last presentation. So can you tell us a little bit, Adrian, about what Spinraza did for spinal muscular atrophy patients? And is there anything that could help us to understand what we might expect for the ASO for FD?
Yes, thank you for the question. Well, so the nusinersen was the first drug that was approved for SMA. So it has had a radical impact on this disease. It's considered what's called a disease-modifying therapy because it really has changed the course of the disease. Happily, for SMA, there are now 2 additional drugs that have been approved. One is a gene therapy drug, and the other is a small molecule. So by the same token, in FD, as you've heard, all 3 types of approaches are being pursued. And that it's great to have as many options for treatment as possible. So what has happened in SMA is that there is an impact on survival, there's an impact on motor function, and not just stopping the course of this progressive disease, but actually allowing improvements over time. One important lesson has been that the earlier the time of initial treatment, then the greater the impact. So much so that patients who begin treatment as newborns, even before the onset of symptoms, develop normally. But even for later treatment, there are measurable impacts and measurable improvements in quality of life. Now, these are different diseases, different drugs. The principles are similar, and I think the lessons we've learned about how to develop this type of drug and how to administer and so on, I think will be very valuable, but we're not going to know for certain until clinical studies are done.
Okay. Thank you very much. That really does give us cause for some optimism. I'm going to ask Sue a question now. And this is more of a broader question about the different approaches where we've spoken about small molecules, gene therapy, and antisense oligos. How could we expect to see differences as a patient if I was thinking about being part of those trials and going forward? What would be the differences you would expect to see for the patient, both in terms of their safety or in terms of their efficacy? I know it's a tough question, but I'm interested to hear your idea.
I know, it is a tough one. I mean, I guess the big overarching answer is we're not sure yet, but we do know a lot. I mean, we've talked about 3 different ways to increase exon 20 inclusion and increase ELP1 protein, the antisense oligo that Dr. Craner talked about, the small molecule, and a modified U1 that I talked about. And so these will differ by method of delivery, as well as how they work to alter splicing, but they should all lead to an increase in ELP1 protein in cells. And the 4th method, gene therapy, really has nothing to do with splicing, but will rather introduce a normal copy of the gene, as Francis described to us. So none of these therapies are meant to specifically treat the symptoms of FD, like the drugs that are currently used, but they're meant to correct the molecular cause of the disease. So we don't know, as I mentioned, if increasing the amount of ELP1 protein will modify the progression of FD. We believe that it will work based on the work that we've done in FD mice, as well as the exciting work that you just heard about from Dr. Craner in spinal muscular atrophy. But until we get one of these types of treatments into FD patients, we just won't know. And that, again, you'll hear my message of the day is why we'll need all of you to participate in clinical trials as we go forward.
We've actually just been asked about your expectations specifically of the small molecule oral medication. Is there something specifically based on what you've seen on the animal studies that will give you some indication of what that might be able to do for patients?
Yes, some of the things that we've seen, and again, we've studied this drug in mice that have FD, and we have been able to see that the drug can rescue the retinal ganglion cells that Francis described, as well as improve gait. And so our hope is that it improves proprioception and gait and rescues neurons that are in the dorsal root ganglia. And so this is all very exciting. Of course, as we've talked to you about in the past, mice aren't people, but these mice are a very good model of FD. And so we have been able to see improvement in many of these characteristics in the mice using this small molecule.
Okay, thank you. That's fascinating. I just hope we can get quickly into clinical. That's really that's what people are asking us as well. How long this is going to take. So I'm going to go straight to Horacio. When can we expect to see some clinical trials with some of these treatments? And I know the Enlorum direction is probably the soonest one. When do you think that could happen?
Well, let me first digress for a second. I'm delighted with the presentations and with what Sue told us, and Francis and Adrian, because the three of them focus on the eye, on the retina, and each of them also show you that there's an animal model, that the problem in retina, those ganglion cells that we are trying to preserve or prevent them from going wrong, we are potentially able to do that, but we need everybody to come and have the OCT at the center. That's something that we cannot do through telemedicine. So all these attempts that thanks to the incredible minds of the three researchers, Adrian, Sue, and Francis, that they have possible forms to save those neurons. How can we do it? Well, it's very important that we have the OCT. It's based on what we saw in the OCT when you come to the clinic. That picture that we take is that these guys are able to think in a way to save those neurons. So you have to come to have the OCT. That's number one. Number two, Adrian Craner, right, was bold enough to tell us that he will have, and I'm just sort of joking that he was bold. I mean, he's optimistic, but he's bold, of course. He already solved one disease. So we hope that we will be able to solve a second disease, and maybe with an approach of these three different approaches all working together. And perhaps to try to answer your question, for next year, we will have the first patient. Trust me, we would all love to say we started. Neither of us can sleep thinking in when are we going to have this, and we all want to announce it. So I'm throwing the glove to these three researchers and the drug developer, other Adrian, right? Let's get it done. We are ready to start if you do all the toxicology and give us the tools. We'll give you the tools, you'll give us the magic. And we'll get to the promised land. But we'll do it. We need everybody's help. So come to the center to have the OCT, and the same will have the OCT, because that is what's we need to measure, and that's crucial.
So thank you for your answer. I mean, that's a very honest answer and a direct one. And also it's a reminder to all of those who are watching this to go and get tested, get their OCT, get their measurements in and be part of that natural history study. And I think that's a really, really important key success factor for anything to happen clinically. I think what we're looking for is to challenge ourselves how many trials and what were the best trials that we could do. But this really is an exciting time, and it's going to be up to the patients to do their bit as well, we hope. I'm going to go to Francis now to tell us a little bit more about the ocular gene therapy. We're actually being asked, why are you focusing on the eye in the chat? And I think that's a very good question. And I think some are also of these ocular therapies, ocular being delivery to the eye, are relevant to systemic, as into the whole body, and some of them are specific to the eye. So maybe you could help answer that question. Why the eye, and how's it going with the gene therapy approach to the eye? Francis.
Okay. So yes, so all of these techniques that we're talking about today, gene therapy or the antisense oligos or the small molecules, they could be used systemically, no question. All of them can, all of them have been used. So for example, SMA, you know, the disease that Adrian worked on, as the ASOs are delivered systemically, okay? Small molecules, what Sue talked about, the great advantage there is they're pills that are taken orally, and then they spread throughout the body. So they too can affect any tissue in the body. Gene therapy also can be delivered systemically. The deal with gene therapy, why we're focusing on the eye first, is the virus for the gene therapy is expensive. And if you're going to do something systemically, you're going to need a lot more virus than if you go into a small space, which the eye is. So one reason is just expense, because we can deliver small amounts of virus to the eye, so it's not as expensive at this stage of the research. The other reason is the endpoints. You need very, very clear, defined endpoints to know if you have an improvement. Is your therapy working? So as Dr. Kaufman described, you know, the way in patients we're going to figure out if the ocular treatment is working is by comparing your OCT images. So the OCT measures the thickness of those axons. So remember I told you about those axons that have to get to the brain. Well, in the OCT, you can actually measure how thick those axons are. And the thicker they are, the better, the more axons you have then. So that's a real defined measurement you can make. And we can do something similar in the mice. So in the mice, we can actually quantify, we can actually count the number of retinal ganglion cells. And so we can ask, you know, if we inject the virus into the eye using very little virus then, can we see a measurable, quantifiable, repeatable increase in the number of retinal ganglion cells? Can we see that there are more axons? So it's something very defined and clear to measure, to document, essentially what's called proof of concept. So if it works in the eye, then we will feel more confident investing the funds we would need to do something systemically.
Okay, so that really helps us. So it's really like a stepping stone. So first of all, we would prove the concept in the eye, and then we would be able to go on and think about systemic therapies. I just want to answer a question that Lisa asked about the OCT scans. We do them in Israel. I know that because I've taken Tamar to OCT scans, and I know that we enter the data. So this is data which is being collected at the centers in Israel as well as in the US, and I think it's really important that we can contribute to that. I'm going to ask a question now back to Adrian, which came up earlier, where we were being asked actually about the mRNA and CRISPR advances in research which have been made, particularly this year. I know the mRNA vaccines that we've all been, many of us have been getting, Moderna and the Pfizer vaccines. Are these relevant to helping treatments with FD? Is there any reason to believe that these kinds of approaches could be advantageous to us in FD? Obviously, we're looking at the three we presented here, but it doesn't mean we're not looking further afield as well. So, Adrian, what's your view on that?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. You know, when messenger RNA technology began to be developed, it was viewed as an alternative to gene therapy, but then also vaccines, and there are other applications. The issue is, so in principle, one could prepare a messenger RNA for the ELP protein. It's a fairly large messenger RNA. And then the question is how to deliver it and where. The messenger RNA vaccines are given as lipid nanoparticles, essentially encapsulated in a bit of fat. But I think that the duration of action of such a messenger RNA is not very long. For a vaccine, that's fine. You just need it to be there to be translated into a protein, and that has to stay long enough to stimulate the immune system. But if you're talking about a therapy, you need to have that protein all the time. And so you would have to give messenger RNA injections, I don't know, I'm guessing, possibly once a week. You need very large amounts of it. You need it to be everywhere. That matters. So I don't think it's impossible, but I think it's a challenge. I think that the current directions that I see messenger RNA technology going to is vaccines for various infectious diseases, some applications in cancer therapy, but maybe it's a question of time and technological development. So it is an interesting platform.
Okay, but clearly the where we would need the mRNA, the amount that we would need is kind of a challenge given the way it's delivered and also the cost which would be involved. Whereas that makes sense, obviously, for immunization and potentially for cancer, but in our case, it's not. It may be more challenging. Okay, I'm going to come back. There was a question to Sue about the age of your mice. What happens do you see a difference between the more mature, the older mice and the younger mice? I mean, not everyone here we're talking about in our FD population are newborns or pediatric, where some of us, fortunately and happily, are getting to good ages. So is there anything we can read into the mouse models and the age of the mice and what we can expect from some of these drugs?
Well, thanks for that question. We're actually working on this right now. Most of the trials that we've done in our mice, we've started treating our mice when they were very young. So they're born with FD disease, and then we begin the treatment soon thereafter. And the reason we do that is, as Francis mentioned, we need proof of principle. We need to prove that in the best case scenario, and that would be if we could treat a baby right after they were born, that this is going to work. But we understand certainly that the real question is, what happens if we treat an FD patient when they're 10 or 15 or 20? And so we're beginning these studies right now. We started enrolling mice in a trial in the lab, and we are going to treat them with a drug and we'll start the treatment much later. So we'll be able to get some first insights, because in all of the things that we've tried so far, we've treated mice when they were very young. So hopefully soon we'll have some insight on exactly what can be rescued when we treat later.
Okay, so that's certainly encouraging, and it's certainly reason for us to believe that it's relevant treatment also for mature mice. So I have a question for Horacio now. We don't have that many patients. I mean, let's face it, how many? Well, there are several hundred around the world. With a few centers. How are we going to, I mean, obviously this is the challenge, that we would be able to bring different therapies. But how can we make the most, do you think, of the patients that we do have to maximize our opportunity to evaluate these therapies and to bring one of them hopefully forward?
Look, our goal is to be able to treat everybody. Right, so I would like to establish that first. Our goal is to treat everybody, early and not so early and late. We do have a constraint that you heard today, which is the need to show proof of concept, meaning that the drug is working. For that, it seems that the younger the person, the easier it is. So we may be obliged to start with very few patients early on, but only with the goal that if quickly an effect is detected, a signal of efficacy is detected, that everybody in the community will have access to the drug, possible access to the drug. And that's why I want to emphasize that everybody should come to the center and send all the OCT, of course, also in Israel and all over. It's crucial to have these data, because those are the ones that can be evaluated to participate in this trial. I hope I answered, Adrian, meaning
You did.
we may be in the difficult position of having to choose a few people to start at the same time. The idea is that everybody should be able to have access to the treatment.
Okay. I think
Adrian,
we
can
all
I
have to
add
be honest.
something?
Yeah, go ahead.
I just wanted to add something to what Horatio said. Something that's very important to keep in mind is that all of these different methods will inform the other. So whether it's the ASO, and hopefully that will be the first into patients, or a small molecule, or the U1, what we don't know is if increasing ELP1 protein, which they all aim to do, will be beneficial. As soon as we know that these treatments are first safe, and then that increasing ELP1 protein is beneficial, that will really open the door to the development of the ones that are the followers, right? Because we'll know that they're going to work if we can just get them into patients. So I think that's why we're pushing all of these forward at the same time.
I think that's very important to say. I also think it's very clear that we have to say, in the world of drug development, it's not a 100% chance that any of these are going to work. We're all trying very hard, and we're all learning about each of them and comparing the data. But we can't guarantee any of them will succeed. A great situation where we would get all three to go forward, potentially as treatments. But even if we got to one, that would still be an amazing outcome. So we have to be honest. We're doing everything we can, and I don't want anyone to walk away with thinking that's it, it's done. It's just a matter of waiting for the time to pass. But we do see that we have real directions from amazing centers and scientists, original, important, groundbreaking research in FD, which are leading to the treatments which we hopefully are going to get into the clinic very soon. And I think that's a very optimistic message. I want to come back something actually to Francis. I want to ask her, in one of your slides, you didn't overplay it, but you talked about the role of a healthy gut biosome for FD. Is there anything that you can tell patients about what we could do to help our general health in FD through the biosome? What do you think you can learn, and what we should do with that?
Yeah, it's turning out to be really interesting. So it's clear. So we've been, okay, from the microbiome data, we know that the microbes in the gut of people with FD is different than their relatives. So we've analyzed the data two ways. One, we've gotten stool samples from patients and from one of their relatives that they live with. So we can kind of control somewhat for environment. And we've analyzed the samples in pairs, and also just randomized everything and analyzed all the samples. And both cases, we find the patients have many fewer species of bacteria in the gut. It's more, less rich. So usually the more diversity you have in your gut, the more different numbers of species you have, the better you are prepared to deal with different situations you can encounter nutritionally. So the goal now will be to dive deeper and try to figure out which bacteria. I mean, the goal would be to find out which bacteria are different, and then ideally develop precision treatments for patients. And so to add back in specific bacteria whose numbers are reduced, for example. Yep. That's kind of the take home from the gut microbiome so far.
I mean, it's a very exciting area. There are companies. I know there's a company called Biomics in Israel, and they're working on, I think, colon treatments, and they've got big pharma behind them. It's a lot of big companies are looking at how we can understand our gut, what they call our gut flora, as in what lives in our gut, and to understand the differences to see what can help us to treat diseases unrelated to the gut. It's a fascinating area.
Thank you. Can I mention one more point? So in our mice, I'll tell you, we did one experiment where we get the same thing in our mice. Our FD, one of our mouse models for FD, the microbiome is very different in the mice that have the FD mutation versus the control mice. And we find big differences if we house the mice together, the mutant and control mice together, versus raise the mutants in separate cages from the controls. And the reason is, this is going to sound yucky, I hope it's not going to ruin your meal, but the mice eat each other's pellets, poop, okay? So they're actually mixing their microbes. And so in the mice that live, the mutant mice that live in the cages with the healthy mice, we find those mice are actually healthier. So the mutant mice actually become healthier all around in many different areas that we measure if they can eat the microbes of their healthy relatives.
I knew we were going to get to fecal transplants at some point in this conversation.
Yeah. So it makes you
Let's
think
not
about
it, right?
Yeah, I know.
You
Sorry.
guys don't try these at home. Don't try these at home. Right?
But it raises the specter. I mean, where it's, I'm not saying we're there, but it raises the specter of some kind of fecal, microbiome transplant at some point. But we're not there yet.
It's a very interesting area. We have a very specific question that's came in actually, to Horacio, with regard to participation in clinical trials. Can a patient participate in more than one trial? Is that possible?
Yes, depending what trial. Let's say there are some trials that during the time of the trial, only one experimental drug can be used. But the trials that are just observational, that do not require a drug, those can be more than one. And in terms of drugs, usually is one. As of course, there could be the possibility, like you heard today, that a trial may include more than one drug. Remember that if we would have, let's say, 2 approaches available to increase the protein, we may potentially use 2 drugs, but it would be within one trial. Did I answer that, Adrian?
Yes, you did. I know for the confirmatory trials, it's very important not to be able to understand the drug that you're testing, and that the inclusion and exclusion criteria in a clinical trial protocol are very important. Perhaps in the earlier trials, we could look at that, but I think when it comes down to the later trials, then we'll probably have to be more strict about applying that. We're going to wrap up fairly soon. I also have a question about stem cell research. If there's anyone on the panel is familiar with stem cell research, and has this been applied to FD? Is there anything going on in that field?
I'd be happy to say something.
Yeah, you should talk about. Yeah, okay, go ahead. You can explain
go ahead,
it
Francis,
much better than me.
Okay, so there is a terrific scientist at the University of Georgia in Athens, Nadia Zeltner, and she has actually, she's working on stem cells. And so she's taken patient fibroblasts and she can convert them into different kinds of neurons. And so, for example, we know in FD, we have problems with sympathetic neurons, we have problems with the DRG neurons, the sensory neurons, and she can take patient stem cells and convert them into either sensory neurons or sympathetic neurons. And then she's trying to figure out what's different about those neurons that derive from the patient fibroblasts, and finding already some really interesting differences.
Maybe tell them that they can
Go ahead.
volunteer sometimes, and we may need another lines, right, for
Sure.
those stem
Yes,
cells.
absolutely. Absolutely.
Sue,
And
and
what?
one of the issues that Sue was telling us that previous studies with stem cells had been done with cell lines that are in a bank called Corel, where Sue and other people had, I think you guys were the ones that donated those sort of original cells that remain there. We now have the capability to produce to give new lines of patients that we know very well. So the person that's working with that stem cell can try to correlate what happens with the patient and some changes in the stem cell. This sounds like science fiction. It is a little bit science fiction, but there are a lot of interesting things. So it is good to also tell you that you may be asked whether you want to give a few cells in your skin in something that it's very, very simple to do a blood to produce these stem cells. And then these very smart people that you are hearing about may give us answers that, again, sound like science fiction.
Can I add one thing?
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
Just really quick, sorry. I just want to also mention Miguel Weil in Israel at Tel Aviv University. He's also made neurons from patient stem cells. So you might be asked to give fibroblast to him in Israel.
The piece I wanted to add is that
something?
to differentiate. Go ahead. The piece I wanted to add is to differentiate the work that Horatio and Francis described in terms of using stem cells to understand FD versus stem cell treatments. And that's a very different thing, right? So I don't know that anyone is pursuing right now. You'll hear about stem cell treatments for other rare diseases that involve bone marrow transplantation or reintroducing stem cells into patients. And that's a very different thing than what we're talking about when we think about using patient fibroblasts to transform into different neurons and then study what goes wrong in the disease and the differences between these neurons.
Yeah, thanks for clarifying that, Sue, of course.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. I mean, remember that we were not referring to treatment. We were referring to understanding. Sue, thank you.
As everyone can see, we just like chatting about these subjects, and we could probably sit here for many hours asking ourselves the same questions. We don't have any answers, but we really, really enjoy both working together and interacting. And I think we've got some great scientists, and it was really nice to be able to share a little bit of our interaction and to try to answer some of the questions that we've been asking ourselves. So unfortunately, we're approaching what's here is 9 p.m. in the evening, and I know it's 2 p.m. in the afternoon, so you're probably getting hungry over on the East Coast. It leaves me really only to say thank you to everyone who's contributed to the panel today and to the science presentations. I'd also like to thank everyone in the foundation who supported the SAB, in particular Lainey and Faye and Laurent, and also Natasha. I really would like to thank the members of the SAB. I know that some of them are watching. In particular, I wanted to thank Ralph as well for his contribution. And I know that we've had a full complement of clinicians as well. And it's really been great. And we're really quite excited about, we hope, what will be really important new treatments for our patients, which is basically, for many of us, is for our kids. So thank you. And with that, I will hand it back to the foundation. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Adrian. It's hard to believe, but we've come to the conclusion of today's program. 3 hours went very quickly. I'd like to extend heartfelt thanks to our amazing speakers who joined us from near and far. We have learned so much about the latest developments in FD medical care and research, and the news is quite encouraging. I also want to congratulate our distinguished FD awardees, Kelly Brotman, Rebecca Newman, Ram Shalav, and Avi Zimmels. And thank you to everyone who participated in the FD Art Contest with your fantastic submissions, and congratulations to this year's winners, Ivan Zelion, Peter Sonnenschein, and Sam Landau, and special thanks to Kaya Delamo from the Dysautonomia Center and Rick Godoti from Positive Exposure for coordinating this fabulous art competition. I especially want to acknowledge the foundation team who worked hard to produce today's program, my colleagues Natasha Weinstein, Aaron Breen, and intern Gabby Sadanoff, as well as Leanne Lugg, who served as liaison from the Dysautonomia Center team. Just a reminder, the foundation needs your help. Please consider supporting the foundation or the FD organization in the country where you live. Your donations help fund medical care and research that ensures better and longer lives. Check out the donation link in the chat box or visit the foundation website anytime. You can also help us by fundraising for the foundation, participate in our fall crowdfunding campaign, join or create a Team FD walk, run, or other endurance event, or contact us at the foundation to find out about other ways to get involved. One additional reminder, the karaoke after party will begin on Zoom at 2:15 in less than 15 minutes. If you're already registered, you should have received a link in your email. There's still time to register, though, using the link in the chat box. We look forward to seeing you there. And while FD Day is over, our conversation does not have to be. Let's continue to keep in touch. You will receive a post-event survey. Please fill it out and return it to us. Your feedback is important and will help us make next year's FD Day even better. If you still have questions that did not get addressed today, send them to us and we will do our best to get you an answer. We want to hear from you. Please let us know how the foundation can continue to be helpful to you and to meet your needs. Working together, we can accomplish so much more. Thank you and goodbye.